So I've finally finished collecting the Dead of Night collection, and what I've decided to do is I'm going to go through and discuss each release. I'm making this video as a little introduction where I'll explain in more detail what the Dead of Night collection is, and I'll also go into what I'm going to be doing for each video. The Dead of Night collection is a collection of video nasties, horror and exploitation films released in the UK. There is very little information about the company online, which I think is what sparked my interest in them. I initially bought a few of the more well-known titles from a market in 2006, and when it came time to finding a complete list of films online, I found that there wasn't one, and I had to go hunting for the remaining few. The most notable aspect of these releases is the bold font on the cover, ripping off the more well-known Vipco releases. From this, it was a case of doing image searches, frequently brought together searches, and some barcode searching, one of the most helpful indicators being the numbering on the spines. As I got to the end of the collection, however, it seemed that there were some releases missing. I started to worry as I thought there were more that I couldn't find. Another thing to note about the Dead of Night collection is its inconsistencies. It will frequently have incorrect information on the back, as well as spelling errors, and what can only be described as overly stretched image artwork, proving just how cheap of a collection this really is. With this in mind, I realised it was more than likely that the numbering was incorrect. With the help of the Music Magpie barcode inputter, I was able to check the missing barcodes. It appears that numbers 21 and 24 were never released, even though number 24 shows up as another release of Just for the Hell of It. And the same for numbers 26 through to 35. Instead, it seems that numbers 26 through to 30, they released double feature DVDs under the name Dripping Blood Theatre. My theory is that these 10 films were planned as Dead of Night films, but were rushed into double feature films, but then they had one left over, so just released it under Dead of Night at the end. Inconsistent. But I believe anyway that this is the complete collection. As well as the shoddy physical releases, it's said that a lot of the film transfers are also in terrible condition, a majority being VHS rips with lots of cuts made. They also feature laughable special features, boasting their interactive menus and joyfully bad trailers. As I've said previously, there's not a lot of information about these, so this being a complete collection is completely speculation. I know little to nothing else about this company, and I'm still yet to watch a majority of these films. There's no release dates printed on any of the boxes, so I have little to no idea how long this company's released DVDs for, and more importantly when they stopped releasing. Throughout these videos, I will discuss the film, giving a small synopsis as well as my own personal opinion, and I'll also discuss the DVD release, pointing out any shortcomings as well as highlighting anything it does favourably. Plan to release one video a week, schedule permitting. So join me as we take a look at a DVD release company that I put too much time into researching and that nobody cares about. Alright, so the first film we're going to be having a look at is Zombie Flesh Eaters. A very well known and decent first title for them to start with. Let's have a look. Zombie Flesh Eaters, otherwise known as Zombie 2, is a 1979 Italian zombie horror film directed by Lucio Fulci. It was intended as a sequel to George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, and was well known in the UK for being added to the list of video nasties. The film starts with a gunshot and what seems to be a man in a body bag being shot in the head. We then cut to New York, where police come across a seemingly empty boat, only to be attacked by the film's first zombie. A reporter named Peter West, played by Ian McCulloch, is sent to investigate the ship to uncover anything the police are hiding. We also meet the daughter of the ship's owner, Anne Bowles, played by Tisa Farrow, who is concerned of her father's whereabouts. Anne and Peter run into each other on the ship at night while they are searching for anything suspicious, and after finding a note from Anne's father claiming he's sick on a Caribbean island, decide to team up. They hire a boat and a husband and wife crew called Hull and Barrett, and set off for the island of Matul. We then meet a doctor and his wife, who are on Matul. We see that the doctor's wife is going crazy, and she claims the doctor's works are unethical and that he's experimenting with voodoo. Meanwhile, back on the boat, Barrett decides to do a spot of nude diving, only to run into a shark and an underwater zombie. Barrett escapes to leave the shark and zombie to tussle in a quite entertaining and incredible zombie versus shark battle. Back to Matul, and the doctor's wife is accosted by a zombie in a very tense scene. This builds up to her having her eye gouged out on a splint of wood. This is probably the most famous scene in the film and one of my favourite gore scenes in any zombie movie. The crew land on the island and the zombie attacks start. The doctor has to deal with patients being reanimated, while the crew deal with the dead rising in some very admirable grave rising scenes. The crew gets attacked and Barrett is killed. The rest flee to the hospital where they meet with the doctor, who explains that Anne's father was infected and turned into a zombie. The zombies attack the hospital, so they burn it down in the big last action scene. They leave the hospital and Hull is attacked outside by Barrett. They kill Barrett and flee to the boat. Hull dies on the boat, so they decide to lock him in the bottom of the ship to use as proof. As they sail home, they learn via radio that the US has been overrun with zombies, and the film ends. I really enjoy this film. I love the makeup and effects of the zombies. Even if it's slightly naff at times, I think under the right circumstances it can be really effective. I think the story starts off a little slow, but by the end I'm always wanting more. I really admire the gore scenes, I love practical effects, and this film really delivers with some very memorable and gruesome sequences. The acting can be a little hammy at times, but for me it adds a charm and is what I've grown to expect from 70s horror. The soundtrack is great, done by frequent Fulci collaborator Fabio Frizzi. Some music cues seem a little out of place, but it overall really adds to the film. Some scenes worth mentioning are the eye scene, the dead rising, the shark versus zombie fight, and the whole final battle sequence. Fulci is great with gore, but also great at setting up shots. There are a lot of voyeuristic angles to add to the creepiness, and some quite stunning shots here and there. Overall, a very enjoyable watch. Now for the release. The first thing to note is that this is released in widescreen, which I'm not too big on. It can make some details very hard to see, especially on a smaller television. The quality of the film is okay, it's serviceable. There doesn't seem to be a lot of remastering done from, say, a VHS release, but it does the job okay. The sound quality is very much the same, just okay. It can be a little tinny at times and sound slightly compressed, but it does its job. An amazing remastering it is not, but overall for the type of film it is, it works. As for cuts made, I think it may have been trimmed here and there. There is a Blu-ray release by Arrow Films which runs for 91 minutes, whereas this comes in at 87 minutes. I think this is the same cut as the 2004 Vipco version, which is said to have minor cuts. It says at the beginning that it's by Stone Vision Entertainment, another company I can't find any information on, and the BBFC website doesn't say anything about it, or this particular release. The DVD sleeve is actually not too bad. The description on the back has far too much detail about the first few scenes, reading almost like a novelised version of the film, and I think they went a bit comma crazy. But the spelling and information seems alright. The running time is close, claiming 90 minutes. The film runs for 87, so I can let it off for 3 minutes. The special features are nothing special. It has a trailer, which features a lot of gore and nudity. Quite a fun watch, but will ruin a lot of the best scenes of the film for people who haven't seen it. We also have something called Film Flash, which turns out to just be an advert for some Laurel and Hardy DVDs. Bit of a weird thing to include, but oh well. And of course there is the director and actor's works, which in this day and age with the internet seems like a waste of time. My final thoughts on the film and the release as a whole was that it's pretty good. For a budget version of one of the most famous zombie films of all time, it does its job. There are other versions out there, such as uncut Blu-rays, but if you see this for cheap, and you can get past the widescreen and the lacking special features, it's worth checking out. Overall, I'd give this a recommendation. Alright, so the next film we're having a look at is Birds of Prey. Now, I haven't seen this before, and I'd never heard of it prior to this review, so let's see if it's any good. Birds of Prey, otherwise known as Beaks, and Beaks the Birds 2, is a 1987 Mexican horror film directed by Rene Cardona Jr. So the film begins with shots of people shooting birds. We then cut to a journalist called Vanessa, played by Michelle Johnson, talking to her perverted boss. He tells her she's to go and report on a farmer who has been attacked by his chickens. She reluctantly agrees, and with her cameraman Peter, played by Christopher Atkins, heads on down to investigate. Meanwhile, we cut to an elderly man in a large house. He looks out of the window at a bird, which then flies at him and pecks out his eye. Back to the reporter, the farmer talks about how after the attack, he feels that all birds are aggressive towards him. They test this with a canary, which scratches his cheek. After some shots of birds, we cut to a pilot, who is having difficulty landing his plane because of a large flock of birds. The pilot is attacked, and the plane crashes and explodes. Back to the reporter, and it seems they are heading over to the man who was attacked previously's house for an interview. He explains that he thinks the farmer's incident is connected to his. He also says that other people he knows in Rome were also attacked in a similar fashion, so the reporter heads to Rome to investigate further. They interview a couple who talk about their attack, and we get a flashback of the woman and her baby getting assaulted by a flock of birds. We then meet a family who are in a park. The father encourages the kids to interact with pigeons. He takes pictures until the birds start acting aggressively, and they flee to their car. Back at the one-eyed man's house, and he gets a phone call from his annoying granddaughter. His daughter then asks if they could hold a birthday party for his granddaughter at his house. He hesitantly agrees. After a weird edit, we learn that Vanessa and Peter are intimate. Back over to the farmer's place, he and his wife are relaxing at a dining table. The birds slowly start attacking and the farmer and his wife are killed. Jump over to a beach, and a young couple are hanging out in a camper van. The girl leaves to go for a jog and the boy is killed. Meanwhile, the family from earlier pull up to the same beach. They have a flat tyre, so while the kids play, the adults bicker. The kids decide to check out the camper, but find a corpse. The family again flee and decide to hide in an inlet. The reporter interviews a doctor who says it seems like a mutation in the birds' instincts, and that they are working together. Back at the inlet, and the jogging girl from earlier meets with the family for shelter. Now the birds really start attacking. A hand-gliding man is killed, the birds attack the children's birthday party, more birds enter the inlet through the ventilation, and after the reporters learn from their boss that it's happening all over the world, they decide to band together with some locals to fight them. To fight the birds, the reporter and her crew use a train, whilst the others all flee from their respective hiding places. After the people on the train blow up a carriage full of birds, the attacks seem to stop. For no reason, the birds go back to normal, and after some look after the Earth messages, the film ends. So, my thoughts on this film. It's alright. It's nothing to take seriously, and I got some laughs here and there. It was pretty fun. The shots of birds are really cool. I think they use a similar technique to Hitchcock, where they have a selection of real birds and a selection of fake ones in the shot at the same time to simulate a huge flock. The acting and dubbing is quite appalling in parts. Here are a few selected scenes as examples.
Hi, Grandpa.
Hi, beautiful. How are you?
Fine, Grandpa. How's my horse?
Like tactics. They'd fly, then regroup, and attack again.
Something I should mention is that birds were harmed in the making of this film. They were thrown through windows, and in a cut scene, a bird was struggling as it was caught by the neck on a pole. This is quite common for low-budget international horror films of the 70s and 80s, and it means that in this release, 4 seconds were cut out by the BBFC. The gore effects are okay and they work within the film. The gore is quite sporadic, but when we do get some, it can be quite effective. There are some really weird edits, such as this one as an example.
Welcome home.
And there are more like this throughout. I didn't like the ending, it didn't explain anything, and seems like the whole film existed for the look after the earth and nature message. It can very easily be compared to Hitchcock's The Birds, and in Italy was marketed as the sequel. There are tons of similar shots and scenarios, and the plot is near identical. I'd say check out Hitchcock's film over this one. As for the release itself, it's a bit of a weird one, compared to last week's anyway. As you can see by the footage, the aspect ratio is a lot better and the quality of the print is about the same. There are some weird parts with the quality dropping, and I did notice this bizarre flicker, which looks to me like a VHS transfer, but I had no problem watching this version. A bit of a weird inclusion is that as the film ends and just before the credits, it says in big bold font Beaks, which at first I didn't understand at all. After learning it was the alternate title, however, I still find it a little strange they'd leave it in. The case is okay, really. The information is decent, summing up the film without giving too much away, and it all seems spelling error free. What they did get wrong, however, is the runtime. Even though the DVD claims 90 minutes, the film actually only runs for 84. The film just starts, no menu or anything, just straight away film. The menu is actually right at the end of the film, or if you press the menu button on the DVD remote, which is something I'm not a fan of. As for the special features, they are really appalling. We have a gallery with stills from the film, we have filmographies again, pointless, and we have what might be the worst trailer I've yet seen. It's basically just clips from the film badly edited together. It doesn't even say the name of the film. Utter trash, and isn't even mentioned on the back. One last thing to mention is when I tried ripping the DVD for footage, my computer made some really loud sounds and the software crashed. Here's a video I recorded of the incident. So overall, I'd say that this film is okay for a laugh. It might be worth checking out while drinking with friends. If you haven't seen Hitchcock's The Birds already, that's definitely worth checking out over this. As for the release, I think that it is the only version released in the UK. There is another version released under Beyond Terror, but I believe it's exactly the same version as this. So if after watching this you're curious, check it out. If you watched this and thought it looked shit, then just don't bother. I'd give it a slight recommendation. Alright, so next up we've got Mausoleum, which is another film I've never heard of or seen before, so let's see if it's any good. Mausoleum is a 1983 American horror film directed by Michael Duggan, and was added to the BBFC's list of video nasties. Duggan was also the director of Raging Hormones, a sex comedy film released in 1999. So the film starts at a graveyard, where a young Susan is crying over her mother's grave. Her aunt tries to console her, but she runs off. And there we get a small glimpse of the acting yet to come. Susan runs into a mausoleum shroud in a terribly superimposed smoke. We have a decent shot of her walking through a hallway, and when she reaches the end she finds a tomb. Then some man enters, but has a seizure. A shadow looks at Susan and she gets green, glowy, Dune-style eyes. The man runs outside, and this happens. I quite like the Mausoleum set. It has a very Hammer horror style to it, cheesy yet nostalgic, and the lighting harks back to 20s style filters, which is quite fun. We end the Mausoleum scene with a long shot of a demon hand. Now, one thing this film really likes to do is to hold on a shot for far too long. We then cut to 20 years later. I know this because of some dialogue much later in the film. We don't get a title card or anything to explain. But anyway, Susan's aunt is talking to Susan's doctor about her mental health. Over to Susan, who is now 30, and she's played by Bobby Brissy, a former Playboy bunny. We see she's dreaming of the mausoleum, but is woken by her husband Oliver, played by Majo Gortner. They're interrupted by their creepy gardener Ben, who seems to like watching Susan through the window. Oliver and Susan decide to go to a club. We get some awful dancing, and Susan gets hit on by a drunken man. They leave the club, and the drunken man barges into them and staggers away. This annoys Susan, so she waits until he's in his car, and then makes it explode with more glowy eyes. And for some reason, the shot of Susan with glowy eyes is just a still image. After an obvious VHS flicker, Ben the gardener returns to advance on Susan. We get some back and forth, some possessed house scare tactics, and the ever-important Ben montage, and finally Susan seduces Ben. After the sex, Sue gets all green eye and kills Ben with a handbrake. We also get an awful shot of Demon Susan in the shadows. The composition's just terrible. After some Susan and Oliver sex, Susan's aunt comes over to visit. Susan's in demon mode and kills her aunt by levitating her and doing this. After Oliver wakes in the night and sees Susan in a rocking chair, he gives Dr. Simon a call and they arrange for her to see him. Susan dreams in reused footage, don't we all? And the next day Susan's maid Elise, played by LaWanda Page, comes round to do her job. She notices green fog coming from Susan's room, and in a scene that I'm assuming is supposed to be comical, runs home scared. Susan goes to Dr. Simon's appointment, and he hypnotises her. The demon comes out, sounding a lot like the Exorcist demon, and now Dr. Simon starts thinking possession is an option, so he gets the help of a paranormal expert. Back at home, and Susan gets flirty with a delivery boy. She, I think makes a phone melt his face. Not too sure about that one. Susan takes a trip to a shopping centre, and oh hey look, electronics boutique. And while she's there, she kills a store clerk after stealing a painting. So this is where the film starts losing me a bit, mainly because I was getting really bored at this point. So the basics are, the doctor is going to get a thorny crown from the mausoleum to exorcise the demon. Susan has sex with Oliver in a bath and kills him. Dr. Simon makes it over to Susan's house and she's playing with a doll. He puts the crown on her and she crossfades into a demon. another example of a shot taking far too long, over a minute but feels like more, and also demon boobs. The Doctor carries Susan to the Mausoleum, she lays the demon and crown to rest, and the whole ordeal is over. Dr. Simon then talks to a man in a robe on a gravestone, which turns out to be Ben. Okay. He laughs, freeze frame, and the film ends. So you can probably guess what I thought of the film. I didn't like it. I was having fun at first, but then it just kept going and was really slow and boring. A lot of the shots were terrible, the angles were all off and the composition was poor. The gore was basic, it likes to cut away from people dying and then back to them once they're dead. And there are so many long shots of nothing with silence in the background. The music, when there is any, is nondescript, at least until the scene where I think it's trying to be funny, then it's just jarring. The acting's pretty bad in parts, and the story's cliché and done to death. Now for the release. Firstly, the aspect ratio is okay. This is the only thing they got right, however. The print is terrible. It must be a VHS rip. There's interlacing issues and colour bleed, making the film look muddy and boring, and there's scratches all the way throughout. The sound isn't great either. Very tinny and distant, and levels going up and down constantly. The case is quite to the point, with not much text, but wait a minute. Poes? Pores? Pause? I'm guessing that's meant to say powers. And then down here, filmography. Come on, you spelt it right here. This is the first of many examples of spelling errors on these DVDs, and as we've grown to expect by now, the runtime is incorrect, this time by 4 minutes. This is another one where the film just starts, and I couldn't even access the menu by pressing the menu button. I had to wait for the film to finish before I could get to it. The special features just keep getting worse. Here we have basically nothing. A gallery, some filmographies, or filmography, and video art, which is just pictures of VHS covers. What a waste of time. Overall then, I'd say that this isn't very good. The release is quite poor, and the film itself is quite boring. This is the only version released in the UK as far as I'm aware, so if you must see this film, this will be the version you end up seeing. But honestly, I couldn't recommend this. Alright, so today we're having a look at Zombie Holocaust, which just so happens to be my favourite zombie horror film. Let's have a look. Zombie Holocaust, also known as Dr. Butcher, Island of the Last Zombies, and Zombie 3, as in the sequel to Zombie Flesh Eaters, is a 1980 Italian zombie exploitation film directed by Marino Girolamo, otherwise known as Frank Martin. So the film opens with a man sneaking around a hospital at night. He cuts off a corpse's hand and puts it in his briefcase. The next day, the handless corpse is found by a doctor and his students.
Well, didn't you say you wanted a hand to help you study?
Good one. We get to see some decent gore effects, and we also meet one of our main characters, Laura, played by Alexandra Deli Colli, who has a passion for anthropology.
Paul, you know anthropology is still my secret passion.
Told you. Later that night, another incident at the hospital happens, which shocks a nurse. Cut over to Laurie's very late 70s apartment, and she gets harassed by a reporter called Susan, who's heard about the strange goings-on at the hospital and says there's a rumour that it's a cannibal committing the act. Back to the hospital at night, and this time the assailant is removing the heart of a corpse. He's just about to eat it, but he's caught in the act. He tries to escape and jumps out of a window, or should I say, a mannequin jumps out of a window. Look at that arm flying off. Oh, now the arm's back on again. Anyway, he dies, and it's revealed that he has a mark on him that was similar to a sacrificial knife Laurie had on her wall. We now meet Dr. Peter Chandler, played by Ian McCulloch, who also played Peter in Zombie Flesh Eaters, and yes, this is the third Peter out of the 4 films I've discussed so far. He meets with Laurie and says that incidents like these have been happening all over. Laurie says that the man who was committing the acts in the hospital was from the Asian Molucca Islands, which just so happens to be where she grew up. When Laurie returns to her flat, it's been trashed and her knife is missing. Peter decides to front an expedition to the island to investigate further, so Peter and Laurie, accompanied by reporter Susan and her boyfriend George, set out to meet with Dr. Obrero, who lives on the island and helps cure the natives. Dr. Obrero is one of the best characters in these sorts of gore zombie films, and you'll see why as we go along. So they meet with Obrero, and he assigns them a guide called Mulatto, and they arrange to travel to an island called Quito. Laurie goes to get changed, gets perved on by a native, and finds a dead head in her bed. The next day, the team sail out with 3 other natives as helpers, or as extras to kill off. And when it grows dark, they decide to land on a nearby island to set up camp for the night and continue in the morning. However, one of the natives goes missing in the night, and just listen to this. Doesn't it sound a little bit like there's some garbled English in this dialogue?
Is anyone missing?
He went to the border and he never come back.
Weird. They go searching for him, and they find him dead and mostly eaten. They soon realise they'd landed on Quito all along, and Mulatto was going to take them to a different island because he was too scared. Some Quito tribesmen appear, and the natives get scared and try to flee, but one gets caught in a trap and eaten. The team give Embryo a call, and he says he will send help, and they should meet him in a white building. They try to get some sleep, but a cannibal's been hiding in the tent, and Laurie has to kill him with a machete. In the morning, they set off to find Embryo, but the cannibals attack again. George is killed in a scene that I love. And Susan is kidnapped. Then a zombie appears. Yes, this is the first zombie we see in a film called Zombie Holocaust, only 47 minutes in, and it scares away the cannibals. What's left of the team flees, and they finally meet with Embryo. He tells Peter and Laurie that they should leave the island, so they get to a boat, but Peter feels something is amiss with Embryo and decides to check it out some more. Then we get this scene.
Be careful!
Incredible. This is where Embryo's character really comes into play. He turns out to be the evil mastermind behind all this. He's been experimenting with tribespeople and turning them into zombies. He also convinced the tribe to resort back to cannibalism. His character is amazing, and every line he delivers he sounds deranged and annoyed.
The patient screamed, disturbing me, performed removal of vocal cords. Between your science and mine is that I don't limit myself to correcting nature's imperfections. I improve on nature. I'm on the verge of discovering the key to increasing man's lifespan by over 100 years. Do you see these bodies? I can bring them back to life when I want. I'm anxious to experiment on a male Caucasian brain.
He has Susan tied down, and he's going to swap her brain for that of a dead cannibal. Peter and Laurie sneak over, but after Laurie gets scared, Embryo finds them. He kidnaps Peter, and Laurie gets taken away by the cannibals. Peter manages to keep hold of a knife even while unconscious, and he escapes. The cannibals make Laurie their queen, and she commands them to attack Embryo and his zombies. Peter throws a lamp onto a zombie, and it catches fire, burning down the operating room, Embryo and the zombies. The film ends. So as you already know, I love this film. The gore is spot on, there are some very nice and well placed shots throughout, and it manages to stay interesting. The acting can be a little campy, but it works in its favour, adding a charm that I love so much. Embryo really steals the show. Every time he's on screen, something entertaining, funny or tense is happening, and he doesn't take any shit.
Calm down, Miss Ridgway. If the natives had wanted to do you any harm, they could easily have done so.
Embryo is played by Donald O'Brien, and he really looks the part of an evil doctor. The music is amazing, done by Nico Fidenko, and the soundtrack was actually re-released on vinyl last year. Might have to get that. I do have a few nitpicks with the film. I think the ending is abrupt and it doesn't quite feel finished. Also, the UK title I think is a little misleading. The film focuses more on the cannibals, and there are only around 6 zombies actually in it, but I guess they couldn't have called it Cannibal Holocaust. Now on to the release. And you know what? I think they got this one right. The aspect ratio and quality is good, both sound-wise and visual-wise. There are a few scratches and decoloration issues throughout, but not in a jarring or obvious way. Very watchable. This is also the uncut version. The casing's okay as well, and the description's quite to the point. It does sound like it's worded slightly weirdly though. They must have had a thesaurus out for it, I think. And there is one stray comma. But the runtime's correct. But they did put Phil Nograuy again. But that seems to be the only mistake. And now for the special features, and oh wow, they did a good job here. We have a bizarre and cheap interactive menu which I find quite charming. We get the standard filmographies again, more VHS cover art, an image gallery and some DVD advertisements, but we also get deleted scenes. Really though, it's just deleted scene. Only one scene from the film, and it's obvious why it was deleted. It's pretty boring. Basically, Laurie gets caught in a trap, and Peter has to kill a few cannibals before getting her out. Quality is lowered quite a bit for this, but it's expected for deleted scenes. We also get 3 trailers, and the US trailer is amazing. The film was marketed as Dr. Butcher over in America, so the focus is on Embryo, even though he isn't really in the film much until the last third. The voiceover for the trailer is stupid, but I love it.
His name is Dr. Butcher, MD, medical deviant. Dr. Butcher loves New York.
Embryo never says he likes New York.
He's a depraved, sadistic rapist.
When did he rape anyone?
And he makes house calls.
I want a house call from Embryo. How do I get one of those? I could pretend I've got a cough, but he might remove my vocal cords. Anyway, so the rest of the trailers show off a lot of the best scenes from the film, so it could ruin parts for people who haven't seen it. I strongly recommend showing someone the film, and then following it up with the US trailer, just because of how off-point it is. Overall then, I think they did a really good job with this one. For a budget release, it has decent quality, and the US trailer is a must-watch. As I've said, this is my favourite zombie horror film, and I always recommend this to people who are just starting out in the genre. There are other versions of this around, and even a Blu-ray release by Arrow Films, but if you see this lying around at a decent price, it's well worth picking up. Overall then, I'd strongly recommend this. Alright, so today we're having a look at Emanuelle and the Last Cannibals, which is a very well-known film and helped popularise the sexploitation cannibal genre. Let's have a look. Emanuelle and the Last Cannibals is a 1977 Italian sexploitation film directed by Joe D'Amato. D'Amato also directed Porno Holocaust and Erotic Nights of the Living Dead, so there's more than likely going to be a lot of sex in this. This film is part of a series called Black Emanuelle, which is an unofficial Italian spin-off of the Emanuelle character, who was a popular French softcore porn character. Many of the films in this series were directed by D'Amato, including Emanuelle Around the World and Emanuelle and the White Slave Trade, to name a few. All Black Emanuelle films star Laura Gemza as the title character. So the film begins in an insane asylum in New York, and a nurse gets her breast bitten off by an inmate. Emanuelle is an undercover reporter in the hospital, and later that night she goes to talk to the assailant, who is restrained to a bed. She teases her and notices a symbol above her groin, which she takes pictures of with a creepy doll camera. She goes to talk to her boss and says that the symbol is that of a cannibalistic tribe thought to be extinct. She meets with Professor Mark Lester to ask more questions, as she's wanting to do an article on this for her paper. He subtly invites her back to his place and shows her some footage of a cannibalistic ritual. They discuss cannibalism, and he eventually agrees to front an expedition. Emanuelle meets with her boyfriend Peter, yes, another Peter, and she has sex with him under a bridge. The next day she meets with Mark, and he goes to contact his friend Wilkes, who they will be meeting up with in the Amazon. We get cuts between Mark contacting his friend and Emanuelle and him having sex. Not sure if she's imagining it, or if it's actually happening. They fly out to the Amazon, we get some nice scenery shots, and they land and meet with Wilkes. We also meet Isabel, Wilkes' daughter, and sister Angela. They arrange to meet Father Moranis, who is deep in the Amazon with a missionary. Isabel and sister Angela are to go with them, as well as 2 guides, to kill off no doubt. That night, Emanuelle and Mark have sex, while Isabel watches and masturbates. The next morning they set off. Isabel and Emanuelle wash each other, while a chimp watches and smokes a cigarette.
Oh, look, an ape.
No, it's a chimp. They decide to set up camp when a snake attacks Emanuelle, but he gets shot in the head and, no way, it's Dr. Embryo. Watch out, people. But really in this film, O'Brien is playing Donald Mackenzie, who I think might be a hunter.
What are you doing here in the jungle?
Hunting. Hunting is my life. I've sacrificed a lot to follow my craving for hunting.
Not sure though. So apparently the savages attacked the missionary and killed everyone including Father Moranis. Mackenzie invites him to camp with him and his wife Maggie, but it seems that someone is watching from the bushes. Maggie masturbates over one of the guides, and then takes him over to have sex with him deep in the jungle. Mackenzie wakes up and notices Maggie is missing, so he goes over to find her and watches her have sex. Then he heads back and pervs on Isabel. The team decide to head back to the base to keep out of danger, but Mackenzie doesn't want to go. It seems he and Maggie have ulterior motives. They agree to travel with them for a while anyway, and the team set off. They find a dead guy on a beach, along with a Bible and a blanket. I assume this is supposed to be Father Moranis. And after a lot of walking, they rest. Mackenzie pervs on Isabel again, and she wakes up screaming. Mark and Mackenzie tussle, and then go back to doing what they were doing before. Okay. Sister Angela goes for a piss, but disappears, so the team go looking for her. One of the guides dies on some spikes, and Sister Angela gets tied up to a tree and eaten by some cannibals. They set up another camp, and in the morning Mackenzie and Maggie sneak off. It turns out they were looking for a crashed plane that was part of an expedition they were on to find diamonds. They find the case of diamonds and have sex, but the cannibals attack again. They kidnap Maggie and leave Mackenzie wounded. The team find Mackenzie and plan an attack on the tribe, so Mark and Emanuelle go round one way and get to a high point where they can see the tribe starting their ritual with Maggie in a cage. Mackenzie, Salvador the guide, and Isabel go the other way, but are caught. Salvador is killed, Isabel is drugged, and Mackenzie is captured. They tie up Maggie, kill her, and eat her genitals. They then tie up Mackenzie and, well, just watch. Loving the effects. Anyway, they rape Isabel and are about to sacrifice her to the water god. All this time, Emanuelle and Mark have just been watching, but finally they decide to make a plan. Emanuelle paints the tribe's symbol on herself, quite impressively, and gets in the water. Mark fires a flare, which draws the tribe's attention, and Emanuelle walks out of the water pretending to be the water god, takes Isabel from the tribe and swims away with her. The tribe catches on and a chase ensues, but what's left of the team escapes. We get a terribly acted speech.
Manolo, Felipe, Salvador lost their lives because they followed us on this mad adventure. And for what? That I'd like to know.
And then the film ends. I thought the film was quite enjoyable. It did get a little dull in the middle, lots of walking, but the beginning and ending were pretty good. It is quite heavy on the sex, but the scenes are short enough to not completely overstay their welcome or get in the way of the story. The violence is quite sparse as well, but the effects were decent. There's a lot of nice and interesting shots throughout, which make it a joy to look at, and the music is a real highlight, done again by Nico Fidenko, and really suits the film. The acting and dubbing can be pretty bad. Here are a few examples.
If it's found out that you're a journalist, can you imagine the scandal will break out? Don't you understand that?
It isn't worthwhile. Leaving all your work at the museum. Or maybe you're past the age for this sort of thing. No, Peter, we can't. Tomorrow I'm leaving for the Amazon, for work. Something very, very interesting. It's about cannibals.
Emanuelle, you're crazy. You're really, really crazy.
Maybe I am. But right now I want to make love.
So, on to the release. This is another good example. The aspect ratio is fine and the print is clean. The audio is really good as well. Very easy to watch. The film does just start though. It's another one where you have to wait until the end of the film to access the menu, as pressing the menu button just restarts the film. The cover's quite good for this one as well. Again, the description is to the point, although we do have a spelling error. I guess A is quite close to S on a keyboard, but still. And also, I think they tried to fix filmography, but they just fucked up again. This time it's filmography. I struggle to understand how they did this really. The runtime is pretty close. The film comes in at 87 minutes. This is a cut version of the film with just under 2 minutes cut out, including a nipple being cut off and a scene of rape. Special features time, and this is pretty decent. We have lots of galleries including VHS art, posters, advertising stills, lobby cards, and a soundtrack sleeve. And we also get the standard filmographies. But we also get the entire soundtrack, which is a really nice feature to have. Because as I said previously, the soundtrack is quite nice, and a CD version can be quite pricey. It's something to pop on while washing the pots, or dancing around the living room naked. And we also get a trailer, which is okay, serviceable and not too long. Overall then, I'd say that this is pretty good. The film's quite fun and the release is quite impressive with the inclusion of the soundtrack. Now, I do also own this on Blu-ray, and this is the uncut version, and it also includes the original Italian audio with English subtitles, which is quite a nice feature. But as I've said before, if you see this one knocking around for cheap, it's well worth checking out. Overall, I'd recommend this. Alright, so next up, we've got Don't Panic, which it turns out I've seen before, not that I can remember it. Let's have a look. Don't Panic is a 1987 Mexican horror film directed by Ruben Galindo Jr. There isn't much information of this film online, so let's just get straight to the story. The film starts at our main character Michael's house, where he and his middle-aged teenager friends are at the end of celebrating his 17th birthday party. After the party, he talks to his alcoholic mother and hears a sound downstairs. He investigates and is surprised once more by his friends who have brought him a Ouija board. We get a glimpse of some of the horrible acting here.
We didn't want to leave without first giving you your birthday present, Mike.
And believe me, there's more to come. We also find he has a crush on the new girl at school, Alexandra, who's mostly eyebrow. We also get to meet Tony, whose performance is exaggerated to say the least.
Bitching, Tony.
They give the Ouija board a spin, but it doesn't seem to be working.
Shut up, everybody! Wait! Wait!
Damn, calm down. They give Michael a scare, which alerts his mother, and she kicks his friends out. Not sure what's so funny, really. We also learn here that Michael's father is a pretty bad father. The next day, Michael is late for school, so he bribes a security guard with a porn magazine, very 80s, and bumps into Alexandra, who is also late. They decide to spend the day together, and we get a little montage of them having fun. Not sure what that sound's all about. They really seem to like sound effects in this film. Michael goes over to Tony's place to tell him that he's falling for Alexandra, and Tony gives him some cliché love advice about an undying rose or some bollocks. That night Michael's restless, and he wakes up with red eyes, and this happens. The next day at school, Michael sees some other guy all over Alexandra, and he leaves in a huff. She catches up with him and talks to him like she's known him for years, and then...
I love you.
Wow, that was quick. She goes round to his house after school, they talk more cliché lines, and then have sex. That night, Michael gets red-eye again, and he sees through the eyes of the killer, who's stabbing a girl he knows. He goes all Lady Macbeth and wakes up the next morning to some awful radio audio.
Good morning, you little devils out there. It's time to snap open those red bloodshot eyes and hit the road.
He still has red eyes, so he wears some shades to hide it from his mum.
Mom, it's sunglass day in school today on my birthday.
Good excuse. And then the TV talks to him, warning him that someone else will die. At school he has a vision that the teacher warns him that Christy will die next, and when he looks over to Christy, she's bleeding and laughing. That evening he's watching TV in his room when the phone rings. Someone says hello, and he goes crazy and trashes his room. On the news we see that the two visions he had were real. The girl was named Debbie and was stabbed to death, and the quick first vision was the death of some guy called Peter. You've got to be messing. So Michael sets off to Christy's house to warn her, but her brother John answers the door, and with crazy eyes he explains that Christy's at work in the hospital and that Michael should leave her alone. So Michael sets off to the hospital anyway. He freaks out some nurses, but it's too late. Christy is killed and Michael is kicked out. The killer approaches Michael outside the hospital, and it's revealed that it was a possessed Tony all along, and a chase ensues. I love the demon voice. It sounds like a terrible haunted house ride. Michael makes it back to his house, but his mum thinks he's crazy, so a doctor comes over to sedate him. The parents bicker while John sneaks into Michael's room and abducts him while he sleeps. The next morning, and John is about to shoot Michael as he blames him for Christy's death. After explaining that it was Tony, the two team up and head over to Tony's house to look for him, but they find an empty, trashed house. They try to think of what to do next when the TV talks again, and we find out that it's Tony inside the TV, and that a demon called Virgil is really killing people, and they need to use a special dagger to kill the demon, and also some guy called Robert is next. They go looking for Robert and find him drunk, and we get some stupid drunken acting.
Hey man, what's going on? Where are you taking me, man? Shut up.
They get Robert in John's car, and Michael goes back to grab a jumper for him. John leaves Robert unattended though, while he robs a shop for some cigarettes. Michael goes red-eye and sees that Virgil is killing Robert in the back of the car. John doesn't notice the body, however, and just gets in the car to wait for Michael. Virgil's in the back seat and jumps out and kills John. Virgil chases Michael, but the police come as they want to question Michael for the death of Christie. The police find the two corpses in the car and Michael runs off to Alexandra's house. It turns out though that Alexandra's family are having a very important meal with the senator. Michael gets invited to join them, but he starts having a vision, shoots blindly, freaks everyone out, and runs off with Alexandra to go look for the knife. They find the knife and a showdown in a warehouse begins. Michael drops some big metal thing on Virgil, trapping him. Virgil then levitates Michael, so Alexandra grabs the knife and kills Virgil. Michael falls and dies, and Tony comes back into his body and dies. Then we're at a funeral for Michael. Some cliche shit with a rose happens, the quality lowers for no reason, and the film ends. So, what did I think of the film? I thought it was okay, just okay. There were some fun bits, and I quite like the idea, even if it is a little done to death. I especially like that it had a bad ending, we don't see too many of those. It doesn't look anything special, the effects are okay, the body count's quite low and the shots are serviceable, but it managed to keep me somewhat entertained. The music's really weird, kind of a nondescript horror music and 80s pop, and the sound effects are just bizarre. The acting can be really appalling in some places, as you've already seen. Here are a few more examples though.
You know him. He's just a smartass. I never thought you'd do this to me. But don't worry, I'll never bother you again.
You gotta save Christy. Please listen to me. No!
Now on to the release. The aspect ratio is good and the print is clean for the most part, but the audio is bad. Really, really bad. It's muffled and distorted in parts, and I've got some examples here.
Here you are.
Hi. How are you?
Listen, I'd like you to come over to my house tonight. I want you to meet my parents. Just came because I don't want to leave things like this.
These weird visions, and the doctor even told me he should see a psychiatrist.
Or I'm gonna interrupt the music that'll exorcise those morning demons away.
And now for the case. Firstly, this tagline is awful, far too long and silly. The description on the back's weird. It's standard in what it says, but the text is justified, meaning we get this bizarre gap here and the terrible spacing issue down here. It just looks ugly and unprofessional. And they're also missing a comma and a question mark. We also get filmography again. How the hell do people keep missing these? But the runtime's not bad, off by 4 minutes this time. And now for the special features. What special features? This is another one where the menu's at the end, and what do we get? 3 images of video art and some filmographies. Terrible. Overall then, I'd say this is okay. The case is badly done, but the film was entertaining, and it's got a very 80s feel, which I think is a good thing. Now, there is another release of this under the Beyond Terror label, but I think it's basically the same thing. Could be good for a laugh. I'd slightly recommend this. Alright, so today we're having a look at Massacre at Central High. Now, I saw this film when I was around 15, and since then I've always classed it as one of the worst films I've ever seen, and I have seen a lot of crap. So let's have a look. Massacre at Central High is a 1976 American horror film directed by René Daldar. Daldar was a protege of Russ Meyer, the guy that directed a lot of sleazy sexploitation films in the 60s, such as Faster Pussycat Kill Kill and Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. Massacre at Central High currently holds a 6.2 on IMDb and 67% on Rotten Tomatoes. So the film starts out with our main character David jogging, and we get a very cliche shot. We then cut over to a school where a guy is painting a swastika on someone's locker. The locker's owner and his friends catch him and give him a hard time about it. Our main character David intervenes, and it turns out he's the new kid at school and he's looking for a certain classroom, but no one helps him except a girl named Teresa.
That's a very nice name. And a very nice smile.
Bit creepy there, Dave. David finds the room he was looking for, and an old friend of his called Mark introduces him to everyone. Everyone being 3 other people. Bruce, Craig, and Paul. They seem to be in some sort of privileged group and they welcome David in. The group then meet up outside in the car park, and we learn that David is a sprinter and wants to be an athlete. They decide to take David in their van to show him around. We get nearly 2 minutes of driving when they hear an old car driven by a guy at school called Rodney. The gang stop Rodney, steal his car and wreck it. This is where we get the impression that this group are a bunch of dicks and bullies. We get more hints towards this as they force a fat guy called Oscar up a rope in PE with a knife and then beat him up in the shower room. David doesn't like this and walks out. We also learn around this time that Mark and Teresa are a couple. We see the bullies swimming and picking on a guy called Spoonie. David talks to Spoonie about standing up for himself, but he says there's no way and the bullies are too powerful a group. The next day David is driving to school and he sees Rodney, now carless, walking and he picks him up. He's nice to him and agrees to help him fix up his car. We then see the bullies abuse a librarian and David again steps in to help. Mark confronts David about why he's helping people and he says that Bruce, the leader of the gang, doesn't like it. Later, we see the gang about to rape two of Teresa's friends. Teresa tries to help them but fails. David appears and he and Bruce fight. David wins and he and Teresa go for a walk on the beach. It's suddenly night and the bullies are about to go beat up David, but Mark stops them and says he'll talk to him. He goes over to the beach and sees David and Teresa skinny dipping in the sea. This annoys him, so he goes back and says David wouldn't cooperate and they should get him, but not now. The next day I assume, and the bullies walk in on David under Rodney's car. They argue and Bruce kicks David, who slides into the car's jack and it falls on his leg, crushing it. Sometime later, and Mark and Teresa are talking about David. Apparently he won't see anyone while he's in the hospital, and Teresa reveals that when they went skinny dipping, she wanted to have sex, but he refused because of Mark. Back at school, and we see the bullies getting a table laid for them, and they have this big medieval bowl of fruit. Bit weird. And we also learn that David will be back soon. Everyone seems to be talking about him, and it seems he's become somewhat of a martyr. David comes back to school, and he had to lose the leg, so he could no longer run. The bullies go hand gliding, but David cuts one of the cables on Bruce's hand glider and he falls into a telegraph pole and dies. Later, Mark and Teresa are talking on the beach. For some reason, Mark suspects David and thinks that everyone's going to die. Not entirely sure how he knows this. At school, Craig is going swimming. David cuts the lights though, so Craig just dives into a pool in the dark. Idiot. The pool had been drained and Craig is dead. This just leaves Mark and Chin Man. Mark and Teresa take Paul to the beach, but he acts like a dick and falls asleep in his van. David, even though crippled, manages to push the van over a hill. It rolls off a cliff and explodes, killing Paul and his chin. David springs upon Mark and tells him he'll kill him next. Now at school, everything seems to be lovely. Teresa is concerned for Mark though, and she goes to talk to David, who's asleep in a shed. He agrees not to kill Mark. At school though, it seems that the bullied are becoming the bullies and are wanting to conspire with David to take over the school, as everyone seems to know that David is the killer. More people start dying though, as the librarian is killed by hearing aid and Oscar is exploded in his locker. Spoonie and the two near rape girls go to the beach to have a threesome, but a Crash Bandicoot style boulder crushes them. After a stupidly dark shot, Mark confronts David in his shed. David admits to killing more people because they were all turning into dicks just like the bullies were, and he's also crazy now. He says he plans to blow up the school which is hosting a dance that night, and he locks both Mark and Teresa in his shed. After some boring school dance shots, Mark and Teresa escape. They run to the dance and meet with David to try and convince him not to do it. He eventually agrees and goes to get the bomb. He runs outside with it and explodes, killing himself. We zoom into a police light and the film ends. So, what did I think to the film the second time around? Is it any better? No, it's terrible. It may even be worse than I was remembering. My main issue with this film is that it's boring. Boring story, boring shots, boring music. Oh god, the music is awful. Boring characters and just overall paced terribly. The acting isn't great, but it isn't bad either, so you can't really laugh at it or enjoy it. And the deaths are terrible, you see nothing. Everything ends in an explosion pretty much, which for a film with this sort of small budget is very underwhelming. The characters as well, oh man, they're so two-dimensional. The bullies are just bullies. That's it. David's like a saint, and then after his accident, he's nothing but crazy. A complete flip with nothing in between. It's like all his original personality was in his left leg. The bullied are just as bad. They go from meek to shit in a matter of seconds. It has the potential to be something interesting and clever, but it just jumps from one thing to the next with no time to build up anything, so you just can't invest, making it, keyword here, boring. Right, now on to the release. It's okay. The aspect ratio is fine, the print isn't great, it has some VHS flickers and decoloration, but it's watchable. And now for the casing. Let's start with this tagline. Right, just think about that for a second. Okay, yeah, it's shit. We also get a little quote from Variety magazine. Violence drenched. I think they may have watched the wrong film. There's hardly any violence in this. The description on the back is weird again. It's justified text, so we get the weird spacing issues, and for some reason they thought brooding and twisted could be a sentence all on its own. We also get this warning here. Not for the squeamish. To be fair, I think the squeamish should be fine with this. It's the tamest film in the Dead of Night collection I've watched so far. We also get filmography again, of course, although I must say the runtime is pretty much spot on. Special features time, and again, we get nothing. Filmographies and some galleries of film stills and VHS art. Useless. Overall then, I think this is shit. Now, Roger Ebert gave this a favourable review, saying it was well crafted and an allegory of fascism. Be that as it may, it's still a boring watch that scrimps on any of the fun of a horror film and instead keeps you checking how long's left. I would not recommend this. Alright, so next up, we've got Oliver Twisted, which is another film I saw when I was younger, but I don't remember anything about this one. Also, that name is terrible. Let's see if it's any good. Oliver Twisted is a horror film directed by Dean Gates in the year 2000. Gates was originally a special effects and makeup artist, working on such films as Day of the Dead and the Super Mario Bros. Movie. The film opens up with some stupidly drawn faces. We then cut to an insane asylum, where a crazy person with long hair is hunched over in a cell. The doctors knock him out and send him over to get his head shaved by a wannabe Jack Nicholson.
You need a cold shower, bro. Shit, that's colder than a dead penguin. Yeah, but you're not as crazy as a porcupine. A what? He brought up the penguin.
What the hell is all that about? Anyway, the crazy guy, who is actually Oliver, wakes up and kills the doctor. The nurse somehow knows this is happening and knocks him out with some tranquilizer darts. We then meet our main character Livy and her annoying friends Bill, Kristen, Trish, and Kev, who can't act for shit.
God, what time is it?
Time for Kevin.
We then meet Mrs. Happ, Livy's mother, who's played by Karen Black from Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses. Mrs. Happ gets a call about Oliver, and she acts really weird. The editing gets really messy, and she ends up at the hospital talking to Dr. Cassandra. We learn a bit about Oliver here. Apparently he's Mrs. Happ's nephew, and his parents both died in a car crash. The doctors say that Oliver is in a coma, and that he can't stay in the hospital as it will cost too much, so Mrs. Happ reluctantly agrees to care for him at their home. We also get cuts over to Livy, who is taking medication and having crazy dreams. The next day Mrs. Happ tells Livy and her cocky brother Jeff about Oliver, and Jeff seems quite excited. Oliver is dropped off in the afternoon and Jeff is dying to meet him, but Mrs. Happ says no. She cuts her hand, walks upstairs and smears blood on the Welcome Home Oliver sign that Jeff made, and for some reason the sign absorbs the blood. Okay. Jeff soon visits Oliver, however, and draws all over him, but is shooed out by Livy, who tries to clean him. Then Mrs. Happ shoos out Livy and hums some creepy tune. So it turns out that Mrs. Happ is going away for a week, leaving Livy and Jeff alone to take care of Oliver. Livy drops her off at the airport, and we learn a few things. One, that Mrs. Happ has kept Oliver a secret, and two, that Livy wants off her medication, as she thinks she's getting better. Apparently she used to have seizures. Not sure why they say all this at the airport. They must have had a really quiet car ride. Jeff bunks off school, and that evening, Livy and her friends decide to have a party. We get some terrible acting, or maybe it's just terrible writing.
So, So, when do we get to meet Rip Van Winkle?
No, I don't think so.
Why not? Is he like hung from wires and stuff because of his coma?
And after some shenanigans, Livy kicks everyone out. She previously ditched her medication at school, and we get a genuinely creepy shower scene. She prepares Oliver's medication and gets curious and wants to have a look at him, but she gets a headache. She leaves and Oliver twitches his toe and breathes. Guess the medication woke him up. The next day, Livy has a vision of a handless postman. At the same time, Oliver gets up and machetes a postman's hand off. After a nice shot, it is evening, and Livy checks on Oliver. He's replaced himself with the postman though, and Oliver has in fact gone to the hospital to attack the nurse who tranquilised him. He sneaks up on her and crushes her hand in a mincer, killing her. After a worrying call from Livy, Dr. Cassandra goes to see another doctor about Oliver, and she says that it's a birth defect and that his parents didn't die and he should talk to Oliver's mother about it. Livy has another vision of knives and a bloody pillow, and that night she dreams Oliver is up and he squeezes his head plate, causing blood to drip in her mouth. The next day, Livy's friends appear again for another party. Oliver is up and sneaks around and watches them. It's Livy's birthday and they get her a cake. Then they insist on seeing Oliver. They go upstairs and Bill is in the bed. It turns out Bill and Jeff moved Oliver into another room. What a bunch of dicks. Can't wait for him to start dying. But oh no, they're out of beer. So Trish and Livy have to go pick some up with the stowaway Jeff in the back, while Christina, Bill and Kev stay at home with Oliver. Oliver kills Bill in the garage, and Livy has a vision of the whole thing in the car park. Mrs. Happ rings up the house and Kev answers. She gets worried and says that she's coming home that night. Christina goes looking for Bill, and Oliver kills her by slitting her throat. Livy gets a headache and starts freaking out, so they drive home, leaving Jeff at the shop. When they get back, Trish says to Kev that Livy is freaking out, so they go and have sex upstairs. These are terrible friends. But it's okay though, because Oliver's here, and he kills them both. Livy pulls herself together and goes looking for people, but she finds corpses. Bit of an artsy shot there. We hear Mrs. Happ's humming, and Oliver appears. We find out that Livy and Oliver were conjoined twins, and Oliver starts to chase Livy. The doctor arrives outside and sees Livy trying to escape, but Oliver kills him. Livy tries to escape in a car, but fails. Jeff arrives home in a police car, and Mrs. Happ shows up as well, but the policeman spots a corpse on the floor, so sends for backup. Livy attacks Oliver, they fight in the water, he acts creepy, and he disappears. The police come, and it looks like Livy was the crazy killer all along. Some time passes and Livy's gone mad and is in the insane asylum, but Oliver is still about, and the film ends. So, what did I reckon? I thought it was fun. I enjoyed the idea, even if I did guess the twist quite early on. The characters are that sort of annoying where it's kind of a joy to see them die. The gore effects are okay. I expected more from someone who's a special effects and makeup artist, but they were okay. We get quite a bit of appalling acting, mainly from Kev. Here are a few more examples.
Listen guys, it's kinda late.
Not really.
In Japan it's late.
No, it's early in Japan.
My
mother's out of town, right?
You're slime.
I can be real slippery.
Kevin, Trish is my friend.
Oh, forget Trish. Think Livy.
Vengeance! Blow it out your ass, grunge breath!
I scared the crap out of you!
Yeah, you can dismount now, you homo.
Ah!
A little 2-on-1, huh?
Oh, yeah! Yeah!
Don't be a tease.
Checkmate. To my imposing victory. Mega.
The film does drag a little. With nearly 1 hour and 45 minutes, it gets a little old and is currently the longest dead of night film I've seen. Doesn't drag as much as last week's film though. The film did start a little garbled and the editing was very confusing, but it sorted itself out in the middle. I wasn't too big on the ending though, a little too abrupt. And now for the release. The aspect ratio is okay, and the quality is serviceable. It's a little grainy but watchable, and the audio is okay as well. But now for the DVD case, and the description isn't very good, especially the last part. It took us a while to figure out what it meant. We thought it was giving away the twist at first. We also have a stray apostrophe, and there's also a spelling error here. We've also gone back to Filmography. Not had one of those in a while. I think they need to rehire the proofreader. The runtime's spot on though this time. They're getting better at those. And special features time. We don't get much. Filmographies, stills, and a trailer. The trailer is quite fun though. The voiceover makes it sound like a cop drama.
The Hap house is not so different from any other. Mary Hap has bills to pay, children in school, and a job which keeps her away.
And it keeps using this light wipe. Very cheesy. Overall then, I'd say that this was okay. It kept me entertained even if it was a little too long for its own good. If you're looking for a silly slasher film, you might find some enjoyment from this. I'd give this a recommendation. Alright, so today we're having a look at Troll 2. Now this is very well known amongst film fans as being a prime example of it's so bad it's good. I've got a lot to say with this one, so let's have a look. Troll 2 is a 1990 American comedy horror film directed by Claudio Fagrasso under the name Drake Floyd. It was originally going to be titled Goblins, but due to concerns for it being unsuccessful in the US, it was rebranded as a sequel to the popular 1986 film Troll. The film currently holds a 2.7 on IMDb and is frequently added to the worst films of all time lists. So the film begins with a creepy grandpa telling his grandson Joshua a bedtime story about a guy called Peter, yep, another Peter, who's been chased through the woods by goblins. Peter runs into a girl who entices him to eat some green stuff, which he does, and it turns him into vegetables, because the goblins are vegetarian and turn people into food to eat. You know, instead of just growing some vegetables. Anyway, Grandpa believes in goblins and warns Joshua of them, and then Josh's mother appears.
What are you doing still up, Josh?
And asks him what he's doing. So, Grandpa was just in his head, and we get a lot of clunky exposition from the mother.
Grandpa Seth has been gone for more than 6 months now. You were at the funeral, and I know it was very difficult for you. It was also very difficult for your father, and for Holly, and for me, his daughter. He was an amazing man. Grandpa Seth has remained in all our hearts, but you must banish him from your mind.
On a side note, not sure if you've noticed, but this film is about goblins. A film called Troll 2 is in fact about goblins. Fantastic. So Josh and his family are going on holiday to a town called...
Yeah, John, that's Nilbog, right. Spell it? Yeah. Nilbog.
We meet Josh's sister Holly, who's working out, and that night her boyfriend, Elliot, appears. Apparently he spends too much time with his friends and not enough time with her. Also, her dad doesn't like him.
If my father discovers you here, he'd cut off your little nuts and eat them.
Ooh. She invites him to go on holiday with them, if he doesn't bring his friends along. The next day, and Elliot didn't show, so the Waits family are off to Nilbog. Holly's upset, so the mother forces Josh to sing.
Stop it, please! Joshua, start singing. Come on, sing that song I like so much.
I don't feel like singing, Mom.
Just sing.
Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream.
Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
Josh has a dream that he sweats green and his family are goblins. He wakes up and demands that they pull over as he thinks he's seen his grandpa, which he has. Grandpa warns him that they're in danger and then he turns into a hitchhiker. Elliot and his friends are on their way to Nilbog, and the Waits family pass them and Holly gives them the finger. So the Waits family arrive in Nilbog and they're doing a house swap with a family who act all shady, and the dad just keeps talking to him.
You'll enjoy our city. It has some smog, it's a little noisy, but our house has all the major conveniences. Yeah, it's got a microwave and video, all the other appliances.
Yeah!
A refrigerator, a bar.
They go inside and there's a feast laid out for them consisting mainly of green Play-Doh. They go to eat it, but Josh has twigged on. Grandpa appears at the window and freezes time. Right, and then he says that Josh has got to stop them eating. So Josh gets up on the table and pisses on the food. I mean, it works. Josh's dad isn't happy with this, and we get one of my favourite lines in the film.
And you can't piss on hospitality. I won't allow it!
What are you going to do to me, Daddy?
Tighten my belt by one loop so I don't feel hunger pains. And your sister and mother will have to do likewise. Okay, Joshua, you want to get rough with me. You want to show me that you don't like the choice of this house for our vacation by going on a hunger strike. Well, I'll accept the challenge. But just remember, when I was your age, I really did suffer from hunger. We'll see who gets through this. But just remember, I've got more practice than you.
We then jump over to Elliot and his friends who are... Wait a minute. What was that? What the fuck are they watching? Anyway, one of the guys called Arnold is fed up, so he goes outside to smoke. He sees a girl in trouble and he chases her and tackles her to the ground. The goblins were chasing her, so he acts like a dick and tries talking to them. This obviously doesn't work, and they throw a spear at him which goes through his shoulder. They run and stumble upon a large house, and here we meet our main antagonist called Credence, and her acting is atrocious.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am Credence Leonore Gilgul.
She's just stupid. But anyway, she gives them a drink, and the girl runs off upstairs.
Oh my god, what's happening to her?
And turns into vegetables. I mean, I guess it's vegetables. Looks more like green mush to me. Arnold is frozen in place, and we get possibly the most famous line from the whole film.
They're eating her! And then they're going to eat me! Oh my god!
Fantastic. Back at the caravan, and we get another classic line.
Damn. There's no milk.
So Drew decides to run into town to get some food. Jump over to the Waits' house and they're running into the same problem, so Josh and his dad go into town. Drew gets picked up by a sheriff who gives him a Play-Doh sandwich and drops him off at the shops. The townsfolk act weird and he gets free milk from a creepy shopkeeper and is told that Arnold is waiting for him in a big house. Over at the house, and Arnold has been turned into a tree person and Credence has made a cake. In town, the shop is closed for a service, and Josh finally figures out the secret of Nilbog.
Nilbog! It's goblin spelled backwards!
Josh skates off and stumbles upon the town having a service where they basically just say how disgusting meat is. Josh makes his presence known though, and the town try to feed him ice cream, but his dad appears, and they leave. After some awful Holly and Elliot acting, her dad appears and takes Holly, Josh and Elliot back to their house, leaving Brent on his own in the caravan. Drew makes it to the big house and finds Arnold, who is mostly tree. He tries to drag him outside, but Credence appears and punches Drew. She then kills Arnold with a chainsaw, which apparently tickles him. A party is being held at the Waits' house, and all the townspeople have brought food. Credence in goblin form attacks Josh, but Grandpa appears and cuts off her hand. She flees. It's okay though, Grandpa brought a Molotov with him and he wants to blow up the house. They run outside, but the guy who was heading the sermon earlier is there and takes the Molotov, and then he starts doing some spell to send Grandpa back. So Grandpa uses lightning to explode the Molotov. What the fuck? The guy dies in goblin form and the Waits family see it, so they slowly back away inside the house. Credence decides to turn into a young and less crazy woman, and the Waits family decide to hold a seance to bring Grandpa back again, while the townsfolk wait outside. Brent is watching TV in the caravan when Credence appears on it holding corn. She talks to him, and he meets her outside and invites her in. She gets all flirty with the corn, and then this happens.
No more popcorn.
Anyway, let's try and finish this now. So Josh appears at Credence's place, and Grandpa tells him they need to touch a stone or some bullshit. The Waits family try and fight off the goblins, mainly by throwing them downstairs. The goblins talk, which is really weird.
Our queen is calling us.
And then vanish. Grandpa disappears, some shit about goodness, and the Waits family somehow know to come over to Credence's house. They all touch the stone and the goblins die, and then they all go home. Josh goes for a nap and his mother takes a shower, but Josh hears a creepy sound. He goes downstairs to see his mum is vegetables and the goblins are back. We get a terrible line.
Do you want some, Joshua?
Josh screams, and the film ends. Okay then, so what did I think? It's a difficult film to talk about, really, because it's so bad. The acting's awful, and the story's ridiculous. Everything about it's off. But I love it. It really makes me laugh. It's very basic in the way it's presented, and most of the time it's like watching a bad college play. I really like the dad character. He's pathetically funny, and the goblins are just bad to the point of some of them looking downright creepy. This one in particular. The effects are decent, even though most of it is just green slime. I really don't like Credence though. She's painful to watch. And the film does get a little boring and old about halfway through. But, I mean, those are my main nitpicks with a film that's just outrageously stupid. Let's talk about the release. The aspect ratio, video quality and audio are all pretty good. Very easy to watch. The casing, though, is really bad. Let me read this bit out. Joshua's fears are well founded for the trolls, which are a particularly dangerous breed live in the woods around the village. Wow, what is all that about? And also, they aren't trolls. Apart from that though, there isn't much else to say. The runtime's okay, we don't get any special features this time around, and that's about it really. Overall then, I'd say this is definitely worth checking out with friends. It's stupid and it's bad, but it's hilarious as well, and it's sure to create a fun time. The DVD's not too bad, even if it is lacking in any special features, it's probably worth picking up for cheap. It gets my recommendation. Alright, so this week we're going to be taking a look at Offerings. Never heard of it before. Let's see if it's any good. Offerings is a 1989 American slasher film directed by Christopher Reynolds. And that's about it really. There's very little information on this film online. So the film begins with fire and a crooked tile that looks like it was run over. Apparently this film stars Doobie Potter. It's rare to see someone whose first and last name have weed connotations. Anyway, a woman is cooking and smoking while a creepy little Damien kid watches. This is Johnny and his mother. Johnny doesn't speak and his mother is abusive, flicking cigarette ash into his eggs and verbally assaulting him for mutilating his turtle. Also, she can't act.
Pets. I seen what you done to your turtle last week. Didn't think I'd look in the bottom of that trash can, did you?
A little girl named Gretchen calls for Johnny and he goes out to play with her and her appalling acting. The other kids on the street see them and start to bully Johnny for not being able to talk. They say he never walked the well.
I bet he's never walked the well.
Whatever the fuck that is. They force him to follow and bring him to a well and make him walk it. He does, but one of the bullies startles him and he falls in. 10 years later, and Johnny is deformed and in a hospital. A dickhead doctor puts chewing gum on his nose, talks about Johnny's shit.
Every time he takes a crap, he thinks he's having an abortion. Let me tell you, he's had some ugly kids.
Tells a nurse to sedate him and then re-eats the nose gum. Also, apparently Johnny ate his mum.
Finger licking good.
The doctor leaves, leaving the nurse alone with Johnny. Then we get a scene with a fella called Mr. Lewis.
Come on back here, Mr. Lewis.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
No idea what it's all about though, and it's never mentioned again. Weird. Later on, an unconscious Johnny wakes up and kills the nurse. The alarm is sounded, but Johnny escapes. We then cut to a lecture about violence. The lecturer mentions something about a part of the brain being affected in serial killers. Foreshadowing. After the lecture, Sheriff Chisholm appears and tells the lecturer that Johnny has escaped. We now cut over to a grown Gretchen who is asleep in her bedroom with some sort of demon clown watching her. She wakes up and goes downstairs. Oh dear, seems her mum's glitching out. You'll see a lot of this in this film. I'm not really sure what's going on. It's some sort of artifacting on bright colours. It's very hard not to stare at it, and it even makes the film flicker in parts. So Gretchen's parents are going away and leaving her alone in the house. We get the cliche setup of the phone ringing and no one being there. Then it rings again and it's our lead character's friend. Very done to death. So it's Gretchen's friend Casey calling. Apparently they're holding a party at Gretchen's while her parents are away. Surprise, surprise. Meanwhile, the sheriff and the lecturer meet at a pond. The sheriff shows him a dead duck, saying that someone was spotted killing them last night.
Got a call from an irate duck lover this morning.
We cut over to a house where a woman in another glitching out top is getting into a car while her son Tim takes out the rubbish. Casey pulls up and asks Tim for some help on her homework, and we get this awful line.
All these chicks want me for is my notes. They can note this.
Johnny attacks Tim in his garage and puts his head in a vice, which he slowly crushes. We then cut over to a school for a scene that is completely redundant, apart from it being led by Doobie. This is Doobie. Gretchen gets home and her dog is eating something that's bloody. Later, Casey arrives and does this.
I was just doing something in the kitchen. What was that? Toasty. Oh, I'm gonna throw up.
What an idiot. They get a call that their other friend Linda will be late because she's waiting on Tim. Linda gets in her car, but Johnny jumps out and kills her. At the party, David and Greg have arrived and they're watching a horror film, so Gretchen orders pizza, which arrives almost instantly, is left on the doorstep, and has what they think is sausage on it by mistake. And they eat it anyway. After a little while, Gretchen kicks the guys out. At Greg's house, he's faffing around in his room when Johnny attacks him from under the bed and kills him. Back over at Gretchen's, and her and Casey hear a sound, so they arm themselves and go looking. They find an ear on the doorstep and call the sheriff. The sheriff takes the ear and the pizza and leaves. Over at David's, and he has a stomachache. He looks out of his window, and Johnny lassos him and hangs him. We get a stupidly long exterior shot, and then we jump over to a graveyard where the lecturer is talking to some freaky intern who is recovering a grave.
Mortician.
The intern says that someone was caught sleeping on the grave last night. The grave is Martha's, who is Johnny's mother. The next morning, and after some diabetes cereal, Casey opens the paper to find a nose, so they get the sheriff back around to take another look. He tells them that he'll have someone guarding them from outside, and then he heads over to Johnny's old house for a snoop around. He finds some kid reading porn, and after taking the magazines, lets him off the hook. Another pointless scene. We learn around this time that the sausage on the pizza was actually human meat. What a surprise. The lecturer is snooping around when he sees Johnny. He confronts him, but Johnny kills him. Some stupid police officer called Buddy is watching over Gretchen and Casey, while the sheriff finds the well that Johnny fell in, and it turns out Johnny's been dumping the bodies there. After some shots that are far too dark, Johnny kills Buddy and cuts the lights in the house. The artifacting goes crazy here as Gretchen and Casey fumble around the dark house. Johnny attacks Casey, and we see his face properly, and we get another chase scene. Gretchen shoots Johnny, but he gets back up, ripping off another and more popular slasher film, I think. The sheriff appears and kills Johnny. Johnny says love.
Love.
He cries, and the film ends. So, what did I think? I didn't think much, to be honest. I thought it was quite a tired idea that didn't add anything new. It was obviously ripping off Halloween, which was made a whole 10 years before this, and just listen to this score. It went way too far ripping off the music. The acting wasn't great, and some scenes were completely pointless. I did have some fun here and there, but not enough for me to enjoy it as a whole. The characters were bland, and we had little development before they started being killed off, meaning that when it came down to scenes that were intended to be tense, they just came out being flat and boring. And apart from that, the film was just very basic, with no interesting shots or ideas. Very forgettable. Now onto the release. It's not great. The aspect ratio is fine, but the quality is poor, mainly with that glaring artifacting issue or whatever it is. It was obviously a VHS rip and not a very good one. The sound matches this by being quite muffled and very low quality. The DVD case is pretty crap too, starting with this overly long tagline, which is just bad, and then over to the back, which is again worded weirdly. We also get a double the instead of that the. Also, Gretchen's name is spelt here with a lowercase g. The runtime's okay, only being off by 3 minutes. Again though, we get no special features. They're getting really lazy with these now. I do think the menu is worth mentioning though. The images are just laughable. Overall then, this isn't great. It gets really boring really fast, and there are much better examples of this type of film. If you are insistent on seeing it, I'd avoid this release. What with the awful print, terrible audio, and no special features, just makes it a complete waste of time. This does not get my recommendation. Alright, so today's film is Dr. Tarr's Torture Dungeon. Never seen it before, let's have a look. Dr. Tarr's Torture Dungeon, otherwise known as The Mansion of Madness, is a 1973 Mexican horror film directed by Juan Lopez Moctezuma. It's an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's book The System of Dr. Tarr and Professor Feather. So the film starts out with this really trippy intro sequence. A horse and carriage rides up to a castle, and inside a big crazy party is happening. I quite enjoy how this looks, to be fair. It's definitely interesting to look at, especially this guy. We then cut over to a guy called Gaston, who is riding in a carriage whilst internal monologuing. Apparently he's visiting a Dr. Maillard, not a Dr. Tarr, who owns an insane asylum. Apparently he's been told that his methods are quite interesting and he wants to meet him. He's also brought along a man called Julian and Julian's cousin Blanche. They move a log out of their path.
His strength is unbelievable.
Yes, I've never known anyone stronger than he.
And run into some guards, which is apparently a new feature. We get a very silly music cue.
Oh.
And some foppish guy walks out, and he lets them past. Further along, and a crazy guy jumps out and laughs at them, and then he's shooed away by this guy. This shot takes ages. They eventually make it to the hospital, but Julian's concerned for his cousin, who's not feeling too well, so decides not to go inside and instead leaves Gaston alone. A bizarre monk lets Gaston in, and we see some of the crazies. Dr. Maillard appears and decides to show Gaston around. He introduces him to his niece, Eugenie, who's playing a harp.
And such fresh beauty. Please accept my honest admiration.
Bit creepy. Meanwhile, Julian and Blanche get jumped by some crazy people in silly costumes. Back over to the hospital, and everyone's drinking wine. Eugenie leaves, and Maillard says he's noticed that Gaston has fallen for her. Bit presumptuous. Meanwhile, Julian and Blanche are trying to escape, but Blanche is attacked. Back again to the hospital, and Maillard's talking about his patients, and he then starts singing.
Lady curling like a thing that never will be known. Her eyes are drowned in the dotted danger of an idiot angel.
They talk a lot, and then they go to see Mr. Chicken.
Eat hearty. Here, eat hearty, eat hearty.
Well, at least he's good at doing a chicken impression. Over in the woods, Julian and Blanche have been kidnapped. Blanche is being raped, and Julian manages to escape, accompanied by some silly music.
He's gonna finish it. Come on, give it to me. Come on.
Maillard then decides that they should go from the roof to the ground via a rope ladder. Gaston climbs on, but is shaken by the guards, which Maillard finds hilarious.
Stop playing, Marshal. Show some respect to my guest.
He then takes him to see the dungeons, where a very thin and tired man is tied up. Gaston at this point starts to question Maillard's methods. Eugenie comes back and does a dance, and then it's bedtime. Gaston goes to his quarters, but he's been drugged, and he trips out, and he hears something about a ceremony. When he wakes up, he runs outside and bumps into Maillard. They talk very old-fashionedly about chivalry, and Gaston believes that Maillard is an imposter. So Maillard throws him in the dungeons, but Gaston makes a rope ladder and escapes through the window. He then runs into Eugenie, who is being part of some fruit ritual thing, so he attacks the guards there and saves her. Gaston then bumps into Julian. Maillard sends the guards to find them, and we get some very silly fighting, mainly from Julian, who's a little bit pathetic. They eventually get ambushed, and Maillard has a good laugh. So Julian gets thrown into a mass cage, which it turns is frequented by the original doctors, nurses and workers of the hospital. Gaston and Eugenie get taken into a big hall, which is the shot from the beginning, where a party is happening, and everyone's acting all artsy and weird. Also, I really like this puppet. We learn in this section that imposter Maillard is actually called Frigonara, and he led the uprising. We get some weird bits like a guy humping a corpse and a coffin with celery on it with the real Dr. Maillard underneath.
Monsieur Leblanc, if you're as clever as you think you are, tell me, what lies under the celery?
The doctors attack a guard and manage to get a key, while some crazy people who've been tarred and feathered do a really cool dance. The doctors attack and reclaim the hospital. We get a speech from Frigonara, they ride off, and the film ends. So, what did I think? I quite enjoyed it. The acting was okay, passable. The thing I really liked was the way it was shot. There are some really good shadows and creepy angles, the lighting was a real highlight, and it was quite surreal, which I can really get behind. The story was good, a classic, can't really go wrong. The music was weird though, mainly when Julian was around. It sounds almost like a cartoon. And they do go a little overboard with the monologues and speeches, but it's quite a short watch, so it didn't really overstay its welcome. Now for the release. The image quality is quite poor, as is the sound quality. The aspect ratio is fine though, it is watchable, and the low quality sometimes exaggerates the shadows, so it was passable. There are quite a few flickers and scratches as well, but it's an old low budget film, so it's forgivable. Now for the case. I think the title's quite funny. They could have easily called it Dr. Maillard's Torture Dungeon. There isn't much to say about the back, it's very to the point and short. The runtime's off by 6 minutes. Apparently this is a cut version, but not by the BBFC, just by the director. It says on the back we get no special features again, but we do get an image gallery. Hooray. This is an instance where the menu comes before the film, not used to seeing that, but they spelt the name of the film wrong, and on all instances as well. Come on. We do get something weird though. Before the menu it actually says Dead of Night. This is the first time they've ever acknowledged their own name with any sort of logo, and the logo looks shit. One last thing worth mentioning is that this is a 15 certificate. I haven't mentioned this before, but this is the second film in the series to have been certified a 15. I thought I'd bring it up now as there are a few more to come in the collection. Now personally I'm surprised that this got a 15, as it's old, it has nudity and sexual violence, and films like this usually get an 18. I mean, Troll 2's an 18. It just seems weird. The other 15 is Oliver Twisted, which again I thought was more gruesome than say Troll 2 or Birds of Prey. Overall then, I quite enjoyed this. It's got great aesthetics and shots, and the story's a classic. Also, it's quite surreal, which is always a bonus. It is let down a little bit by the quality of the DVD, but it's passable. I'd recommend this. Alright, so this week we're taking a look at Shopping Mall. Now, I've got so many versions of this because I kept getting sent the wrong disc. I did watch this when I was a kid, and I remember enjoying it, so let's see if it's any good. Shopping Mall is a 1986 American sci-fi horror film directed by Jim Wynorski. Wynorski has been involved in over 100 exploitation films over the past 25 years, most being direct-to-DVD porn films. So the film begins with some guy stealing some jewellery, but a robot appears to stop him. They run through some product placement and the robot eventually shoots tasers out and electrocutes him. It turns out this was all an example video at a conference where a shopping mall is announcing new robot security. They say that the robots are designed to stop thieves and then alert the police without killing. A couple on the front row, who are apparently characters in something else, annoyingly take the piss and argue. We then jump into the titles with some sped up footage and some child covered in shit. We then meet two of our main characters, Susan and Allison, who are waitresses at a pizzeria owned by a stereotype.
You're breaking my heart. Menage America, porca miseria.
They talk about going to a party after work. Allison is nervous as she won't know anyone, and Susan is hooking her up.
Waitress, more butter.
We then cut over to the robot control room, where the maintenance man who looks a little like David Byrne is hanging out. Some lightning strikes a box, and the robots turn on and kill him. We then meet more of our main characters, the geeky Ferdy, the cool guy Greg, and the cocky guy Michael.
He ain't gonna know diddly unless you tell him. And you ain't gonna tell him, are ya?
They're all apparently the ones holding the party, and they're having it in the mall after it's closed. We also learn here that Allison is being set up with Ferdy, and that Susan and Greg are a couple, as are Michael and a girl called Leslie, who we'll meet later. Outside, a couple's car has broken down. These are two more of our main characters, Linda and Rick. They fix their car and head off to the party. We meet Leslie and her disapproving dad, and Alison is fretting about the party still. Over at the maintenance booth, and the next guy walks in for his shift. The body of the first guard is gone, and the guy gets killed by a robot. The party is underway with some shitty dancing. Ferdy and Alison get introduced, and seem to like each other. The robots are out and about now, and just listen to them. They're so loud, you'd definitely be able to hear one of these coming. Back to the party and people are getting frisky, and we get a slightly creepy striptease. 30 and Alison are watching a horror film and seem to be hitting it off whilst being charmingly awkward. A janitor is getting to work. This is Dick Miller playing his reoccurring character Walter Paisley. This character's appeared in over 7 films and weirdly it's in this one. Anyway, a robot comes along and kicks over a bucket and it then electrocutes Walter. I really like the effect, it's old fashioned but looks cool. After a comedy transition,
smoking's bad for your health.
I have to.
Leslie forces Michael to go out into the mall to get her some cigarettes.
Why?
He agrees, but a robot appears.
Jeez, you little bastards are quiet.
No, they're not. He does a The Day the Earth Stood Still reference.
Batu, Barada, Niktu, okay?
And then gets killed. Leslie goes looking for him, but finds him dead. She screams and runs, but a robot blows her head off. The gang sees this and panic. The robot bursts in through the glass, so they all run into a storage room and all the exits lock down. They try to get into the vents while the robots plant some explosives. The girls manage to make it into the vents before the robots blow their way in, but the guys don't, so they run to go get weapons while the girls crawl to get out. The guys shoot a gun to draw the attention of one of the robots and it works, so they throw a gas canister underneath it and blow it up. Also, that robot has horrible aim, and apparently bleeds.
Jesus. What's that?
Robot blood.
Susan is concerned for the guys, so they drop out of the vents and grab some flares and molotovs while the guys are faffing with an elevator. The blown up robot stands back up and the girls come running with the robot chasing them. They light their molotov, but it doesn't do much, and Susan gets shot and blown up. They run and a robot gets in an elevator, which just looks silly to me. They shoot a gas canister on top of the elevator and it explodes, destroying the robot. They all go to the pizza place to wait it out, but Greg's upset. 30 has an idea to go to the maintenance room and destroy the computer, so they all set off, but Greg is too hasty and gets thrown off a balcony. They get into a shop via a shutter. The robots kind of look at each other, and then one of them laser cuts through it. The gang decide to use mannequins as decoys, and when the robot finally cuts through, the decoys work. And the robot gets all electrified? Not sure why. I think maybe one of the lasers bounces back at it. Linda gets hit, and Rick appears on a cart, but gets smacked, electrocuted, and then explodes. Only Alison and Ferdy left now. They decide to split up, but Alison pretty much immediately gets in trouble. Ferdy comes to the rescue and throws a canister at the robot, which just throws it back at him. Again, I found this bit really silly for some reason. It knocks Ferdy to the floor and he bleeds out the back of his head. We get a huge chase now. Alison hides in a pet shop and has tarantulas and snakes crawling on her. She then hangs off a ledge to hide, but loses her grip and luckily falls onto a tent unharmed. Metal Gear Alison. She then runs into a paint shop and throws paint and spirits all over the floor. The robot enters and she throws a flare onto the paint and explodes it. Turns out Ferdy's okay, they hug and the film ends. So, what did I think? I really enjoyed it, it was a lot of fun. It was paced quite well and we actually had some character development this time, meaning that when the characters started getting killed, I actually kinda cared. Some of the shots were quite cool too. The music was very 80s, which is fun, and the acting was that sort of 80s cheesy and it made it all quite charming really. It's quite a short film, only coming in at 1 hour 16 minutes, meaning that it doesn't overstay its welcome. Now for the release. Again, the aspect ratio is fine, but the print is terrible. Blurry and very low quality. The audio's okay though. I mean, it doesn't affect the film that much, but a cleaner copy would have been nice. And again, before the film we get the Dead of Night logo. Wonder how long they're going to keep that one up for. And the menus before the film again, and spelling error free this time. There's very little to say about the case. The description's worded a little weirdly and it keeps capitalising shopping mall. But apart from that, it's fine. The runtime though, this might be the worst one yet. 14 minutes wrong. That's a lot of time to get wrong. Again, it says we get no special features, but we do. We get another image gallery. Now, as I said at the beginning, I have been sent 2 other copies of this film, where the case was Dead of Night but the disc was Beyond Terror. I was curious and wondered how the versions differed. It doesn't. It's exactly the same, and it even has that stupid Dead of Night thing at the beginning, meaning that either these 2 are the same company, or one just completely copied the other. Overall then, I really had fun with this one. I'd say it's a really good example of a low-budget sci-fi horror film, and was surprisingly entertaining. Again though, it is let down by the print, but the film itself is definitely worth checking out. The film gets my recommendation, but the DVD does not. Alright, so today we're taking a look at Night of the Beast. I've not seen this one before, and I've not heard very good things, so let's have a look. Night of the Beast is a 1993 American-Italian horror film directed by Eric Luzil. Luzil is well known as a producer for Trauma and for directing the Class of Nukem High sequels. So the film begins with a huge VHS flicker, and we're in a monastery where a woman is dancing for an old guy and a lot of people in skull masks. Straight away this feels like it was filmed in someone's basement. After what feels like an age, the old man, whose name is Lucas, chats about the rules within the cult and worshipping Satan. They bring in a sacrifice and put her on a tanning bed to threaten her with a knife, and then they take her off the bed and drag her while she annoyingly screams. They lock her in a cell with a demon, which I guess is eating her, while Lucas has a seizure. Cut over to Tom Cruise in an office. This is Stephen, a police officer. Another officer called Susan comes in and asks him about the case he's working on. Apparently he's looking for a missing girl, and he says he's no closer to finding her, but Susan's found him a pentacle.
It's a pentacle.
Jump over to a woman called Karen, who's at a sinister film audition. The woman auditioning her says that the film is a horror film where evil wins and that they'll be in touch. As Karen leaves, the bookcase opens and Lucas, dressed as Hugh Hefner, appears smoking a cigarette. He walks over to the phone and begins calling the girls who've auditioned, telling them they've got the part, and then has another seizure. We cut over to some drunken people getting out of a car. The 2 girls and 2 guys stagger over to a large abandoned warehouse with some cages, while 2 kids watch. One of the guys, called Jason, says that his dad makes films, and proceeds to handcuff one of the girls and lock her in a cage, saying it's for a movie. The girls start to freak out when Lucas appears. Apparently Lucas is Jason's dad. Lucas has a go at Jason, saying that the girls can leave, and then he changes his mind and says that they can't. They take one of the girls to The Child, which is the name of the demon from earlier, for dinner, and leave Sarah in a cage, and she does whatever this is. We go back over to Stephen, and apparently Susan's got a lead for him called Jocelyn, and 2 more girls have been reported missing. The film flickers and Steve calls up Jocelyn for a statement whilst pretending to chew gum. He goes round to her house and she goes upstairs to get undressed. It feels like it could turn into a porn any second. We get an awkwardly flirty statement scene, and then we cut over to Karen, who's also naked. She takes a shower while people break into her house. It's Jason and his crew, and they kidnap her and put her in a coffin. They throw Karen in a cell next to 2 other actresses, and then the screen light cuts to black. I thought I'd sat on the remote or something, it's so jarring. Anyway, Jocelyn's at the station helping a sketch artist, and then Steve asks her out. He then goes over to take a statement from one of Karen's neighbours, who apparently saw the guys with the coffin. Steve's such a flirty knobhead.
Stay for some coffee? I have some great dessert in the fridge.
Yeah, I bet you do.
Cut back to the dungeon, and that woman's dancing again, and Lucas has another speech where he talks about feeding women to the demon child thing, and then he bleeds out his eyes. We then cut over to Steve, just to find out that Jocelyn wants to sleep with him, and then we go back to Lucas again, who's having a chat with Sarah. It's time to kill her, apparently. They talk for ages, and finally they grab her, and she screams like a monkey. We finally see the demon, and it looks shit. It chases her around and acts like an idiot. Cut back over to Steve, who's waking up in Jocelyn's bed after having a bad dream. The next day, and Susan walks in on Steve, who's having doubts about his case. He says something I just couldn't hear properly.
Oh, you're going on vacation. Something I could use right about now.
And then they do a kiss for some reason. The next morning, and they manage to catch one of the cult members called Mad Dog. They grill him and spot his pentacle.
Pentacle?
He laughs, and we get a terrible bit of editing.
Come on.
Don't you think it feels like we went back a few scenes, like the DVD jumped back or something? Back to the cult, and Lucas doesn't trust Mad Dog, so he puts a spell on him and Mad Dog hangs himself in prison. Steve's just finished having sex with Karen's neighbour. God damn it, Steve. When the phone rings, it's Susan ringing about Mad Dog. I like how she knows exactly where he'll be. Meanwhile, Jason is kidnapping Jocelyn, and the kids from earlier are back and they see the coffin going into the warehouse. They follow.
Wow, a secret passageway. He touched something on that desk. Are you sure? We've gotta go in there.
It's like watching a school play. They walk for fucking ages and they finally bump into a woman who either can't act or has a stupid British accent. Or both.
Get me out of here! Find the keys, please! They're gonna kill me!
Back over to the station, and the kids are giving a statement about what they saw, and they talk so straightforwardly.
Well, we don't know if they killed him, but we do know where they're keeping the girls. We talked to one of them. She told us they were going to kill her.
It's quite funny. Steve follows the kids while the cult put Karen in a cell with the child. The kids run back and bump into two police officers. Steve meets the British woman and her acting is yet again appalling. After this, Steve finds Jocelyn, who's been tied down by some cult members. Lucas appears and says how he used to run a freak show and the child was his freak. Then Lucas has a fit while the police kick the cult members in. Not sure what's going on now. Lucas is seizing, the child speaks. The cult members are on fire, Lucas dies and the child goes through a green hole. After all that nonsense, we're back at the police station where the kids are getting a medal. They stand around awkwardly, and the child bursts through something, and the film ends. Right, so what did I think? I thought it was bad. There were parts that I was enjoying myself, but mainly laughing at it, and it all came down to the way it was paced. There were really long scenes of nothing thrown in the middle of some quite interesting and funny parts, making it feel quite jarring. There were far too many characters to keep track of as well. I was constantly saying, which one's that again? And for a film with this sort of plot, you don't want to be cluttered with characters. The sets were okay, quite cliche, but it looks like a lot of effort went into them, or they were borrowed from other films. The acting was appalling in parts and just mediocre in others, and the music's forgettable. It felt quite sleazy as well. Lots of pointless soft nudity combined with the way it was shot made it feel quite uncomfortable. Now for the release. It's terrible. The picture quality isn't great, and on top of that there's a constant flicker throughout. It was an obvious VHS rip. The audio's pretty bad as well, with levels bouncing up and down and the quality dropping drastically in parts. They seriously seem to be getting worse at this. A quick thing to add. Usually when I rip the DVD footage for editing, it's called DVD volume, which is a generic name, but in this instance it was called Night of Beast, in all caps. Weird that this one has a title. Now for the case. Not much to say about it really. It refers to the henchmen as gophers, which seems very silly to me. The runtime's off by 6 minutes, but in the other direction this time. They usually overcompensate, not undercompensate. But at least it's better than last week's. There's no Dead of Night logo at the beginning. I knew they wouldn't keep that one up, but I thought they'd have done more than 2. The menu's before the film again, and as with previous weeks, we only get a stills gallery for special features, and again it isn't mentioned on the back. Very boring. Overall then, I thought it was terrible. It was mainly let down by the pacing and the cheapness, but the low quality of the print didn't help either. I would not recommend the film or the release. Alright, so today we're taking a look at Eric's Revenge. Very generic title. Let's see if it's any good. Eric's Revenge, or Phantom of the Mall Eric's Revenge, which is what this print goes with, is a 1989 American horror slasher film directed by Richard Freeman and is based on The Phantom of the Opera. So we begin the film with a guy breaking into a mall at night. A guard spends way too long thinking this guy is a mannequin.
What the hell? You ain't no mannequin.
And when he finally realises, he's knocked out and dragged away. After we're shown the different title to the DVD case, we learn that Pauly Shore is in this film. Shit. Also, this fire over the credits is reminding me of another film I talked about recently. We get a weird jumpy fade and we're in a mall where a conference is taking place. I feel like I've seen this before too. Hope that this film will feel more original as we go along. Anyway, they're announcing that the mall, which is new, is finally complete and opening. The speech is being given by Harv, the mall owner, and we also meet Mayor Karen. We run into some of our main characters, Melody and Susie. They both land jobs in the mall and a photographer checks them out. Cut over to a guy in a vent. He marks off a day on his calendar. I wonder who that could be. Melody and Susie go over to an ice cream stand where Paulie Shaw playing Buzz is working. He gives them ice cream with an ear in it as a practical joke. The mayor comes along and chats with the girls. They say they managed to get jobs, so the mayor wants a picture with them for the papers. The creepy photographer is back and he takes their picture. After this, the photographer approaches Melody, saying he recognises her from a house fire that happened where the mall was built. Apparently Melody was saved, but her boyfriend Eric wasn't. By the way, this photographer is called Peter. We haven't had a Peter in a while, but it's just another one to add to the list. Melody finds flowers in her locker, which were the same type Eric used to buy her. What a mystery. After this, Buzz confronts Peter, recommending he stay away from Melody. We meet Harv's stroppy teen son, and then cut over to Eric in the vents. If you didn't twig on that it was Eric by now, you're an idiot. He kills a repairman by smashing his face into a fan. We jump over to some security guards perving on the girls in the changing rooms, and oh look, it's Ken Forey from Romero's Dawn of the Dead. They're told that there's some strange knocking in the vents, so the pervert goes to check it out. We then see Melody looking at a dress she can't afford. It's kind of mentioned later, so I thought I'd include it. The creepy guard acts like a dick, so Eric shoves him into a fuse box, electrocuting him, and then he throws his corpse on Harv's desk. Melody and Susie are finished for the day and are going home, but Melody finds that dress that she wanted in a car. The car won't start, so she goes to look under the bonnet, but a guy attacks her and Eric shoots the attacker in the arm with a crossbow, and then the guy runs off. We're then in a dream sequence where Eric and Melody are getting it on. Melody wakes up screaming. Back at the mall, and Buzz shows Peter that there's subliminal messaging under the mall's music. Okay. We then cut to Eric working out, and then to Harv's son stealing from an arcade. Then back over to Eric, and we see that he's watching some Melody tapes with soft 80s rock in the background. It's ridiculous. Back to Peter and Buzz, and Peter notices a suspicious looking guard, so he goes to spy on him and a chase ensues. Peter runs into the mayor and the guard stops. Peter goes looking for Melody, while Melody puts on the jukebox. Some more soft rock plays and she has another flashback to Eric. Peter appears and tells Melody that he thinks the guard he saw started the fire. Melody says how strange things have been happening, like the flowers and the dress, and apparently the song that's playing was Eric and hers song, so she starts to think that Eric might still be alive. A piano man takes a break. Now we know. Eric is snooping around in the vents, and the piano man turns out to be Melody's attacker from last night. Eric puts a snake in a pipe, and it comes up the toilet and bites the piano man in his balls. Meanwhile, Peter has a blurry picture of the guard, and apparently no one in the mall has heard of this guy. Harv's son is snooping around, and Melody and Susie are leaving work. He acts like a dick around them both, and Eric sees this and lassos him, and then uses an escalator to kill him. Peter asks Melody what happened the night of Eric's house burning down, and apparently there was a note on his front door from the council wanting the family to move out. Eric and Melody get frisky when the fire starts. Melody escapes out the window, but Eric doesn't appear to make it out. Melody also saw the arsonist, which looks a lot like the guard dude from earlier. I think his name's Christopher. Peter wants to dig up Eric's grave to see if he was actually buried. The guard appears and confirms it was him who burnt down the house. He threatens them, but Peter punches him and a car chase ensues.
Peter, look out!
That feels familiar too.
Peter, be careful!
Someone jumps on the roof of the guard's car. It's Eric. The car flips over, but Christopher seems okay. Peter digs up Eric's grave and it's empty, so they go to see the mayor to tell her everything. They say that Eric is still alive and they think Harv was behind it all so the mall could get built, but she says she needs proof and they should find Eric. After another dream sequence that turns into her sleeping with Peter and the guard as well, we see that Eric is planting some bombs. Later, Christopher attacks Melody, but she is saved by a roundhouse kick by Eric. He cuts Christopher's head off in a door and takes Melody away to his lair. She wakes up and they talk. His voice is ridiculous.
Nobody will ever hurt you, Melody. Nobody, I won't allow it.
But his burnt face looks kinda cool, I guess. Eric says he's been living down here and working out since his house burnt down. He wants to be with her, but apparently she's fallen for Peter, so he gets mad and goes to prepare his bombs. Peter is looking for Melody and falls into an Eric trap full of rats. He escapes and runs into the snake from earlier. Eric and Peter finally fight, and Peter gets in the last punch and runs with Melody, but Eric chases. Buzz and Sue run into Peter and Melody, and then they all bump into the mayor and tell her about the bombs, but apparently she was in on it all too. Eric appears and throws the mayor out the window. Buzz makes a bomb announcement, and all the people leave the mall. The guards try to shoot Eric, who's on the rafters, and he uses a banner to swing down into Harv.
Look what you did to me! Look what you did to me!
And he sets him on fire. The mall explodes and Peter and Melody kiss. We pan across Eric's corpse and the film ends. Right then, so what did I think? It was okay. It was very bottom of the barrel slasher film and a poor Phantom of the Opera, but I've seen a lot worse. The acting was acceptable and the music was fun. There was no suspense whatsoever, and this can mainly be blamed on the title. And watching the characters try to uncover the blatantly obvious mystery got a little tired, but it was paced okay, and there was enough happening to keep me interested. Now for the release. And you know what? This was really good. The print was spot on, both visuals and audio were very clear. Very surprising. The case seems okay, we have a spelling error here, and again it's formatted and worded weirdly, especially the lack of space here, but it's okay. The runtime's off by 4 minutes this time, with the film being 86 minutes long. The menu's at the end again, like some of the earlier ones we looked at, and we get no special features at all. Overall then, I think this film was lacking quite a lot. If you're looking to scrape the barrel for a subpar slasher film, you may find some enjoyment from this, and you could do a lot worse than this print. I'd slightly recommend the film, and if you are interested in watching, I definitely recommend this release. Alright, so today we're taking a look at Dark Power. Not seen this one before, and I keep confusing it with Don't Panic. Let's have a look. Dark Power is a 1985 American horror film directed by Phil Smoot, who's only directed one other film called Alien Outlaw. The film stars Lash LaRue, who was a very popular Western actor in the 40s and 50s, and is best known for being well skilled with a whip, and even taught Harrison Ford how to use one for the Indiana Jones films. So the film begins with a huge flicker and some text talking about the Toltecs, whilst using terribly colloquial punctuation. We then cut over to an old Native American man called John Cody, who's dying in bed and doing his best impression of Citizen Kane.
Toltec.
We then get the credits while two news reporters tell us that Cody was well known for practicing magic, and the reporter Mary is going over to check out what he meant by Toltec. We're then treated to this sequence of a boy walking through the woods with something following him. It turns out to be some dogs, and they chase him, but he's saved by Lash LaRue playing Ranger Gerard and his whip. He just whips and whips. We then jump over to a fat complaining guy called Earl. He's helping clean out Cody's house, and he notices an eagle and skull ornament, which is apparently a symbol of dark power. We cut to a bar where Mary the reporter and Gerard are having a drink. They chat about Toltecs, which are apparently a Mexican tribe that preceded the Aztecs, and Cody believed that the Toltecs moved to America. Mary interviews Gerard.
Good. I get their attention that way. Is that about ready?
And he just wants to talk about his whip.
I was going to tell you about the whip, and it's said to have powers of protection even in the evil days. I would like you to mention the whip was a gift from Cody to me in your story.
We then meet one of our main characters, Beth, who's apparently got a bum deal with her college dorms. Mary appears and tells Beth and her friend Lynn about Cody's house being available, and they agree to check it out. We then jump over to when the girls have already moved in, and Beth's friend Tammy is thinking about joining them. She's reluctant, however, as she's heard of the dark power on the land, but Beth shows her around, and she starts to like it.
Gee, would you check this cabinet space? I know.
And she eventually agrees. But Lynn starts acting like a bitch about her. Tammy leaves and Lynn gets mega racist.
Are you two allowing? No, you two are actually coercing a black girl to stay with us. We're from the same hometown. We went to the same junior high school. We graduated from the same high school. She knows full well how I feel about associating with black people. I found this place, and we decided that we were going to try to populate it with our friends and keep any unwanted strangers from moving in. So you two bring that nigger in here.
Fucking hell, Lynn. Over to Mary, who bumps into Gerard. She wants to find out more about Cody's land, so they go to a library and look at some documents. They find out from some guy that Cody wanted his land to be dug up and anything found to be buried at sea, Apparently the Toltecs would bury themselves alive and on their burial anniversary would rise and feed on the blood of the living. Also, 3 people went missing when the house was being built. Back over to the house, and a creepy guy annoys Susan. This is Craig, Lynn's brother, and because Lynn's such a terrible person, she's invited him to live with them just to get back at Beth for letting Tammy live there. Also, he's quite sleazy. He appears later and looks at the girls in the shower and bath, so Susan shoves his head in the toilet. Meanwhile, Mary and the guy from the library have figured out that the anniversary of the Toltecs' burial is tonight, so she decides to head over. Craig invites his friends over for a very shit party, and Earl appears to fix the toilet. He talks to the girls who are all hiding in their rooms trying to study. Also, the little kid from earlier's back. He's called Cletus and he's obsessed with driving Earl's truck. Craig's friends act drunk.
He did what you wanted to do with his face. Come on in, let us do what we want to do with yours. Yeah.
While Earl fixes the toilet, but Cletus does a runner. Earl follows, but it's too late and Cletus runs away. Earl dropped his tool, so he bends down to get it, and a zombie hand appears. Gerard gets a call from Mary that the Toltecs are rising tonight. While back at the house, one of the Toltecs is knocking on the door. Craig's friends answer and act all stupid, and what the fuck is that thing? It looks like a melted Marilyn Manson. They fool around until it attacks, and this one that looks like a goblin shoots Craig's friend with an arrow. They run and bump into another one that looks like a bootleg wrestler doll.
We can take him.
And they throw stuff at it, but it doesn't really do anything. Craig's friend gets his throat slit, and Craig gets shot with an arrow. Craig's other friend runs into Tammy's room to hide. The zombies argue and grunt at each other. Okay. Alan, which is Craig's last friend, gets kicked out of Tammy's room and him and Lynn run to get into a car, but it won't start and it draws the attention of the zombies, which leads to Lynn getting shot in the arm. Good. Also, her screaming annoys the zombies. They run to a boat, but they don't have a key, so they kind of slowly push it out, which obviously doesn't work, and a zombie just pulls them back in. Alan kind of attacks one of the zombies, but he rips his hand off and does this. Susan hears something outside, so goes to check it out. Lynn stabs a zombie in the head, but she gets shot with an arrow. The zombies then attack Susan. One throws an axe, but misses. And even does the shoulder shrug. It pulls the axe out and uses it on Susan. Back over at the house, and a zombie is acting like an idiot in the kitchen. It breaks stuff and drinks wine. Beth and Tammy think that it's the drunken party that's just getting rowdy, and Tammy agrees to go up and get Beth's silverware so it doesn't get damaged. She gets it, but a zombie appears and she threatens it with a knife. Tammy realises Susan is missing, and the zombies have got Beth. Tammy attacks it and Beth hits it with some weights. The girls are surrounded when Gerard appears to whip the zombies.
Feel my whip!
Gerard whips around but gets knocked out. A radio gets turned on where Mary's saying something about the light containing the dark power, and the girls remember the set of eagle knives in the storage room, so they grab them and Tammy goes on a killing spree. Gerard wakes up but there's only one zombie left. The zombie grabs a whip and they go outside for a whip off. No joke. Bet you weren't expecting this for a climax. After a lot of whipping, Gerard beheads the zombie and it's all over. Gerard has an inner monologue directed at Cody, and the film ends. Okay then, so what did I think? I thought it was really stupid. Right off the bat, the tone was all over the place. You have these long scenes talking very seriously about the Toltecs, and long drawn out suspense shots like the kid in the woods at the beginning, and then you have drunken zombies shrugging comically, and whip-offs. The editing was weird too. Like this sequence here, lots of close-ups very quickly edited together. Just wasn't needed. The acting's pretty bad, as was the music. And it all just seemed very messy. But I did have a laugh while watching it. It may even fall into the so bad it's kinda good category, especially with that ending. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Now for the release. It's appalling. It flickered pretty much constantly. It was like watching an overly used VHS, and I think I've seen less flickering in films from the 20s. And the audio was terrible too. Sometimes the music was louder than the actors. And it all sounded very muffled and compressed. This is another instance where the menu's after the film, and again we get no special features. And now to the case. We have an incorrect word here. I think it should be where instead of there, and again it just reads weirdly. The runtime's off by 13 minutes, with the film coming in at 77 minutes, which is awful. Now, a quick thing to mention is that this is the last Dead of Night film to have the Dead of Night logo on its spine. As you can see, the rest are just plain black. So, we're past the logo now, let's see what those plain black ones will bring us. Overall then, I think this was really stupid. But if you find terrible films funny, it might be worth a watch. Although it is let down heavily by the visual quality. I'd slightly recommend the film for the it's so bad it's good factor, but I'd definitely say avoid this release. Alright, so this week we've got Don't Look in the Basement, which is the first of the plain black spine DVDs. Let's have a look. Don't Look in the Basement, otherwise known as The Forgotten, Don't Go in the Basement, and The Snake Pit, is a 1973 independent American horror film directed by S.F. Brownrigg. It was added to the list of video nasties, and a sequel was made in 2015 by the director's son Tony Brownrigg, which was met with very negative reviews. So the film throws us straight into an insane asylum. We meet Sarge, a guy who thinks he's still a sergeant in a war, Harriet, who believes her doll is her child, and Sam, who has the mind of a child.
Bet you don't know how many kinds of soup I've eaten, Janie. Come on, guess.
Sam is kind of our main crazy guy. We then meet Danny, who jumps out and annoys Harriet. Cut to outside, where Dr. Stevens is chopping wood with Judge, a very nervous patient. A nurse comes outside to say that she's quitting, when Judge kills Dr. Stevens with the axe. Dr. Masters runs up to sort out the situation, while we get a monkey scream from the nurse. Harriet sees her doll is missing. She finds it in the nurse's room and thinks that the nurse was the one who stole it, so she attacks and kills her. We then meet our main character Charlotte. She had arranged with Dr. Stevens to start working for him. Dr. Masters tells her that Dr. Stevens is dead and that she had no knowledge of her coming, but she eventually allows her to start and she shows her to a room. Apparently there are no locks on any of the doors, including the patient's ones. An old lady appears and says that Charlotte should leave.
Get out!
And she says this poem while kinda sounding like The Residents.
Up the airy mountain, down the rushing glen, you never can go hunting for fear of little men.
And she pulls some crazy faces. The next day, and Charlotte and Dr. Masters are going through paperwork when Dr. Masters secretly hides a document. Ooh. They talk about patients, and apparently Dr. Stevens didn't like operations, and the last one he did was a frontal lobotomy on Sam. They also talk about a patient called Allison who's very overly sexual, and we'll meet her next. Over in Judge's room, and Allison's getting all flirty with him. He's having none of it though, and she has a shout at him. We then jump to Charlotte walking with Mrs. Callahan. She insists Charlotte leaves again and says her poem. Back at the house, and someone cuts Charlotte's phone cable. Sam comes in and says he thinks Dr. Stevens is still alive. The next morning, and Charlotte finds that Mrs. Callahan's tongue has been cut out. Apparently she's okay though, she just lost a lot of blood. And a tongue. A repairman appears, he lets himself in and talks to some of the patients, not realising for a while that they're all crazy. Also, there's a really bad edit here.
Sir, you've got some trouble with your telephone. Could you show me where the equipment is?
Dr. Masters appears and she isn't happy about him coming, but she lets him do his job. Allison comes over to the repairman and gets all flirty. He tries to get her off, but she corners him. Jennifer, the reclusive one, attacks Charlotte with a knife, but is pulled off by Dr. Masters and slapped. And we get a really weird edit again. And then we cut over to Sam, who's still talking about Dr. Stevens being alive. Danny comes in to annoy Harriet and Allison. He grabs Harriet's doll and then gets all touchy-feely with Allison, but runs away laughing. Allison runs off crying and then gets all flirty with Judge again, but he's still having none of it. She then asks for Judge's help, looking for the repair guy I think. Danny and Sarge have an argument and Dr. Masters walks in to tell Sarge off, and she sees a piece of paper on the floor. I think it's the one that she hid earlier, and I think it says that she's a patient here. She grabs the paper and sets fire to it and forces Sarge to hold it. Yeah, she's crazy. Sam walks in on Charlotte mixing drugs, and he says that Dr. Stevens is worried about Charlotte and wants to help her. That night, Judge walks in on Charlotte with his axe and is about to kill her. Danny appears and kisses her, and Judge says that he'll kill her later. Sam is sweeping and notices something, so he runs off to tell someone. Jennifer sees that someone's been through her drawers and goes looking for a medication, but gets attacked and killed. Sam runs into Allison and takes her to see the dead repairman. Allison freaks out and says that it was Dr. Masters who did this, as she's a patient and is insane. Charlotte goes asking people about Dr. Masters, and they all confirm it. They also say that Dr. Masters told them all that Charlotte was a patient, so she confronts Masters about it, and apparently she used to be a nurse but accidentally killed someone quite early on, and it sent her over the edge. Masters has a syringe and tries to attack Charlotte but ends up sticking herself. The film sneezes.
I'm going away. You're going away?
And things start to kick off. Charlotte walks in on Allison in bed with the dead phone guy. Sam gives Charlotte a note from Dr. Stevens, who is apparently still alive, so Charlotte then goes to look in the basement, even though the film title says not to, and she finds someone on the floor who she then starts to attack, and it's Dr. Stevens. Masters and Sam appear, and Masters uses Sam to take Charlotte upstairs, and they're about to lobotomise her, when Sam has a flashback and changes his mind, and he ends up rescuing her. All the patients enter with weapons and kill Masters. Sam takes Charlotte outside and tells her to leave. He then goes back inside and kills everyone. He gets a popsicle and cries, and the film ends. Okay then, so, what did I think? I really enjoyed it. It was paced well, had very likeable and colourful characters, and to say it was filmed in 12 days on such a small budget, I think it ended up being pretty fun. It is a little cliche, and it doesn't really paint mentally ill people very well, but for an independent horror film from the 70s, you could do a lot worse. The acting was pretty decent, and the gore was okay, and the music fit well with the atmosphere. There were a few editing issues I noticed, but that's about it. Yeah, surprisingly good. I did guess the twist quite early on though. Now on to the release. It isn't great. The print's very low quality and the audio's pretty bad. But look at this menu. What the fuck is all this about? They actually use their logo. Outside of the DVD case, this is the first time they have ever done that. 16 films in. They don't use that shitty Dead of Night intro thing though, that just disappeared. Insane. The menu is before the film as well, very nice, but we get no special features. Now for the case. The tagline is awful, and on the back straight off we have murder spelt wrong. Also, it says things out of order plot-wise, over-exaggerates the extremeness of it, and kinda gives away one of the twists. Not great. The runtime's off by 6 minutes this time, which is funny, because if they'd have just left it at the usual 90 minutes, they'd have been right. Stupid. I should point out as well that, even though this film was banned, and as far as I can see this is the uncut version, it's got a 15 certificate, which again I feel I've seen a lot tamer stuff than this with an 18. I mean, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is an 18. Weird. Also the DVD was named again, this time it was called Basement. Overall then, I thought this film was pretty good. Now, I'm not sure whether I'm saying that because this is better than some of the shit I've seen on this release so far, or whether it's actually a good film. It's hard to tell at this point. But I had fun watching it. It was let down by the release, however, so I would recommend the film, but I would not recommend this DVD. Alright, so today we're taking a look at Silent Night, Bloody Night. And it's not even Christmas. Let's see if it's any good. Silent Night, Bloody Night is an American horror film directed by Theodore Gershner in 1972. A remake was made in 2014 and a sequel was announced in the same year. The film stars many of the Andy Warhol superstars such as Mary Woronov, Candy Darling, Odine and Louis Love, to name a few. So the film begins with a woman walking through the woods and inner monologuing. This is Diane, played by Mary Woronov. She's reminiscing about a house that's going to be knocked down. Her dad is the mayor of the town she lives in, and the house was once owned by a man called Wilfred Butler, who died when he was set on fire in 1950 on Christmas Eve. People speculate it was intentional, but it was classified as an accident. After the credits we continue with the inner monologues where they are burying Wilfred, who then reads out his will saying he leaves the house to his grandson Jeffrey and he wants everything to remain as it did when he died. Now in the present the house has been sold and apparently word got out to a mental hospital or something. We get some weird car sounds and shots of what I think is a guy stealing a car. And then we cut over to the lawyer who will sell the house, called Tarr. He has a meeting with the mayor and he leaves a woman who turns out to be his mistress in the car. Carter is introduced to the mayor, the head of the newspaper, the sheriff and the phone operator Tess. There's a farting sound. And then they all act strange about the house. Meanwhile, a dog is killed by someone. Back to the meeting and Carter offers to sell the house to the mayor for $50,000 and gives him a day to think about it. He also says he'll be staying overnight in the house and everyone begins acting suspiciously again, and Tess insists that she hooks up the phone lines for him. Carter talks to his wife on the phone, and I think he's trying to sound like Jimmy Stewart.
Oh, no, I can't tell you what it is now. I wouldn't be surprised, now would it?
We get a weird film tear, and Carter and his mistress set off to the house. Carter sings while someone is snooping around upstairs. They go to bed, but are attacked and killed with an axe. The killer then phones the sheriff and puts on a funny voice, saying that they are Mary Ann, and that he should come over to the house. A guy pulls up outside Diane's house as she wraps presents. He comes in and she pulls a gun on him. This is Jeffrey Butler, and he's come because he's heard that the house is for sale. She gives him directions to the sheriff's station, and he leaves. The sheriff is on his way to the house when he sees something. He gets out to look and finds a diary next to Wilfred's grave, and he is then killed with a shovel. Jeffrey comes back to Diane's, saying he couldn't find the sheriff. They have a drink and a chat. Apparently Jeffrey's never seen the house, and he had a phone call saying there's a woman waiting for him there. After a terrible line.
Can I come too? What for? I'm pushy.
They head over. On the way, they see an empty sheriff's car. They ruminate on how strange things have been happening, and set off.
Let's get out of here.
We are now in the newspaper office for some reason, where Mr. Tillman is closing up. Jeffrey and Diane appear, and they want to get the keys for Jeffrey's house and wonder if he can help. He agrees to go up to Tessa's house with Jeffrey, while Diane stays in his office. They arrive at Tessa's house, which is full of birds, and she isn't there either though. Meanwhile, Diane gets a call from the killer, saying he wants the mayor to come over to the house, as he has the diary.
Bring your father to the house. This is Marianne.
Tess is over at the house alone. She sees the sheriff's car outside and goes in, but all the lights go out. We get a cool bit, and she's killed. Diane is having an inner monologue full of exposition again. She finds a newspaper that says that as well as Wilfred dying in 1950, his wife died of TB in 1930, and their daughter was raped in 1933. Her name was Mary Ann and she was 15. She then gave birth in 1934 to a son called Jeffrey. The house was then turned into an insane asylum where she lived. Jeffrey creepily appears and scares Diane. She makes him read all this new information and Jeffrey decides that it's finally time to go over to the house. On the way though, they accidentally run over Toman, who had his hands cut off, and they just drive away. We get to the house and Jeffrey goes in while Diane waits in the car. The killer, or Mary Ann, rings the mayor and tells him to come over, and the music jumps.
Won't you come over here, Mr. Mayor? We're having a reunion.
Jeffrey reads Wilfred's diary and we get a flashback. We see that it was Wilfred who raped his daughter and turned the house into a mental hospital to help her, but it didn't seem to be working and he hated the doctors, so he set all the inmates loose and they killed everyone. Wilfred thinks the inmates killed Mary Ann, and he's been wandering and taking revenge ever since. Diane goes in the house and Jeff says that Wilfred is alive, and that the people who run the town were the inmates at the hospital. The mayor arrives and both him and Jeff shoot each other and die. Wilfred appears, saying that Diane is Mary Ann, and she shoots him. She has a little inner monologue about crying all night, and that they're tearing down the house, while heavily implying that she actually was Mary Ann. A digger comes, bookending the film, and the film ends. Okay then, so what did I think? I really didn't like the first hour. but the last part I quite enjoyed. I thought that it started very boringly, lots of exposition through monologuing and just dull, dark shots with not a lot happening. But when the flashback kicked in, I got quite interested. I liked the way it looked, and the ending just seemed more to the point and fun. The acting was pretty bad, especially from Diane.
Who's coming to dinner?
Oh, Daddy.
And this is Tess Howard.
How do you do?
She operates our switchboard.
Oh, really?
We call her the communications director.
Hello, Jeff? California license. Lucky you.
Would you like to see my maniac card?
And except from the flashback and the torch scene, it all looked very basic. The gore was okay though. I'd say it wasn't as good as, say, Silent Night, Deadly Night or Black Christmas if you're looking for a Christmas horror film. Now for the release. And it's awful again. A definite VHS rip with flickering and bad scratches, and the audio is very muffled. We have no special features again, but we get that Dead of Night menu, and we also get a new Dead of Night introduction. Just look at that. Incredible. And I forgot to mention the guy in the menu last time. Now, I just assumed it was someone from the last film we watched, but no, he must just be their mascot or something. I wonder what film he is from. And now for the case. They seem to like the hyphens on this one, but that's about it, apart from the general weirdness. The runtime's spot on for once as well. Bloody hell. Another quick thing to mention, the folder was named again this time. This time it was called Silent Night. Overall then, I would not recommend this film. Even though it did pick up at the end, I still don't think it's worth watching. Especially not this print. I wouldn't recommend the film or the release. Alright, so this week, we're taking a look at Embryo. Now I was quite interested in watching this one. Let's see if it's any good. Embryo is a 1976 sci-fi horror film directed by Ralph Nelson. Nelson also directed such films as Lilies of the Field, Father Goose, and Charlie, the latter of which tackles similar grounds to Embryo. The film supposedly now sits in the public domain. So the film begins with this text, saying that the technology we see in the film is within our grasps. After some credits, we're in a car being driven by Paul, who is a doctor. He nearly runs over a dog and decides to help it, so he brings it back to his house where his assistant Martha also lives. They take the dog into the lab and begin helping it. Also, apparently the dog is pregnant. Paul calls his son Gordon to fetch him some equipment. Gordon and his pregnant wife Helen get ready and rush over, as apparently this is the first time they've heard from Paul since an accident happened. They arrive at Paul's, where he's taken out the dog's fetuses and he's put them into containers, after this awful line.
They're alive. And that makes them beautiful.
We learn that he's successfully keeping two of the fetuses alive. We find out that Paul's wife died, and since then it hasn't worked, until now. One of the fetuses dies and Paul tells Gordon and Helen to leave. Later, Paul adds in a hormone to the last remaining fetus that accelerates cell aging. It's something he and his wife were working on before she died, and it should effectively age the puppy a lot faster, meaning it'll get out of the fetal stage. This seems to work. The mother dog dies, but the puppy is now a puppy, and Paul loved it very much. He keeps his findings a secret and tells everyone that the puppy is actually the mother dog. He names it number 1, and apparently it seems to be learning very quickly. Paul now starts thinking about experimenting on a human, but when he isn't looking, number 1 kills and hides the body of a smaller dog. Bit of foreshadowing maybe? Paul meets with a guy called Jim who works at the local hospital and asks if he can get him a fetus. Jim eventually agrees, and later he calls up Paul saying a pregnant woman has killed herself and he can have the fetus, so they rush it over. He does his thing and it seems to be working. He says though he is nervous about telling the medical board, as they'll probably get him for his ethics. As the baby gets older, he starts subliminally teaching it some maths.
16 and 16 are 32. 32 and 32 are 64.
And this is the only maths, apparently. The baby is now a young woman. She wakes up and wanders off. Paul finds her naked in a doorway and decides to call her Victoria. She tries to talk and eat a mirror, and eventually she repeats the maths that was on the tape.
2 and 2 are 4. 4 and 4 are bloody do?
The next day, Gordon and Helen are off on holiday, and Victoria catches a fish and the dog eats it. Victoria and Paul walk through the garden and chat about her coming into existence and her rapid learning. She eats a flower and Paul calls her unique, but she begins to get a little existential, and later she reads Paul's journal. Martha comes back from wherever she was and Victoria hides from her. She snoops around for Paul but doesn't find him. When Paul gets back, Victoria tells him that she hid from Martha and that she wants to see more of the world, so he agrees to take her out. Paul plans to introduce her to everyone, so they make up a backstory for her. They arrive at Gordon's, but there's a party already happening, and Paul thinks it might be too much, but Victoria insists and they go in. He introduces her as his new assistant, and she seems to be hitting it off, but Martha seems a little jealous. Some computer guy gets a little creepy with Victoria, and she ends up besting some knobhead at chess and lets him win, saying that she's never played but has read books about it. That night, Paul is getting ready for bed, and Victoria comes in and seduces him. She gets up in the night and starts freaking out, and she gives herself more of the stabilising drug, which was mentioned earlier to be quite addictive. The next day, Victoria meets with the computer guy from the party. He lets her ask a computer a question, and the answer that comes back is something about the pineal gland of a fetus. She then goes to the park and has fun, but starts feeling pain and collapses in the ocean. She goes home and injects herself again. We then cut to a dinner party with all the main cast. Martha confesses to being afraid of Victoria and she doesn't trust her, but Victoria hears it all, and that night she chloroforms Martha and then injects her with something. The next day Martha leaves, but ends up dying on the way, so Paul sets off to sort out the funeral, leaving Victoria alone. As soon as he leaves, Victoria starts destroying his research and learns how to do a C-section. We get a huge VHS flicker, and Victoria hires a prostitute. Paul finds out that they found his drug in Martha and quickly calls Gordon. Helen, meanwhile, arrives at Victoria's while she's experimenting on the prostitute. Victoria tries to get her to leave, but she won't listen. Gordon tells Paul that Helen is with Victoria, and Gordon panics and tells him to get over there immediately. Victoria drugs Helen, and Paul and Gordon appear mid-operation. She's cut Helen open and removed the fetus. She says she doesn't want to kill, she just wants more of the drug.
And I'm also what I believe is called a junkie.
Everyone stabs at once and Gordon ends up dying, knocking over the fetus, which I'm guessing dies as well. Victoria drives off with Paul following, and she's aging rapidly. She crashes her car and Paul tries to drown her, but the police arrive. We find out here that Victoria was pregnant with Paul's baby, and Paul wants it dead. The film ends with the sounds of a baby being born. Okay then, what did I think? I thought the film was okay. It was paced alright, the characters were pretty good. It did get a little silly at the end, but I don't think it ruined it. It was made pretty basically, and I quite like the practical effects. It's hard to talk about the music, and I'll explain why in a minute. And apart from that, I'd say it was surprisingly better than I was expecting, even if it was a tad long. Right, now for the release. Just look at it, seriously, this might be the worst looking one yet. It's so blurry and there's loads of VHS flickers and scratches, and the audio is something else. Listen to this. No, the soundtrack was not made by Merzbow. It just sounds appalling, and the voices do it as well.
What I need you can't get me. By your own words you called it murder. Get out, please.
It ruined the film, completely. This is hands down the worst audio yet. Again, we get no special features, but we do get the intro logo and the menu again. Wonder if they're going to keep this up until the end now. And now for the case. Firstly, they're missing a capital letter at the beginning, and they get the information wrong, as well as giving away the ending. But yet again, the runtime is spot on. This is another film that has a 15 certificate, and you know what? Fair enough. The print is that bad you can hardly tell what's happening anyway. Overall then, I thought the film was okay. It was just heavily let down by the print. Dark, blurry visuals and a soundtrack that just shits out noise really ruined the film. But if you can find a different print and you're in the mood for a sci-fi horror, you could do a lot worse. I would recommend the film, but I would not recommend the release. Alright, so this week we're taking a look at Popcorn, which has got a stupid name, but I've kind of been looking forward to seeing it. Let's have a look. Popcorn, also known as Phantom of the Cinema, is an American comedy horror film directed by Mark Herrier in 1991. Herrier played Billy in the Porky's films, and this is his only feature film as a director. So the film begins with some masks in water and a jazzy title. We then cut over to a girl called Maggie who's having a bad dream in which a man shouts Sarah. And someone is holding a knife. She wakes up to her alarm and records her dream into a tape recorder. Apparently this is a recurring dream. Downstairs the phone rings, Maggie's mum Suzanne answers and a voice says something about the 9th circle of hell.
Remember who the 9th circle of hell is reserved for.
Maggie comes down and we learn she's an aspiring filmmaker and is using her dreams as a film basis. After a rocking soundtrack, Maggie's at school. We meet with her potential boyfriend Mark, who wants to sleep with Maggie, but she won't until the script's finished. We then jump over to a film club. They say they've lost their usual space, but they have an idea on how to make the school care about them again. They plan to renovate an old theatre and play B-movies with gimmicks for the students. They go and check out the theatre, and a guy who runs a movie memorabilia shop says he'll help them out. We get a pretty bad montage of them doing up the theatre, and afterwards they find an old film reel called The Possessor, which is in the bottom of a box with a warning printed on it. So they decide to give it a run. It looks like your stereotypical piss take of an art house movie, but Maggie starts connecting the film with a dream and faints. She wakes up and learns that the film was made by Lanyard Gaze, who was the leader of a film cult in the 60s, and the film was a response to bad publicity, and the last scene was the live murder of his family. Maggie goes home and scares her mum.
Mom? You scared me.
And asks about Gaze. Suzanne acts all weird and wants Maggie to take some time off. The phone rings again, and it's that voice, this time saying he wants to meet with Suzanne, so she goes alone to the theatre. She brings a gun though, but some trippy stuff happens, and inside she sees Gaze, which is also one of the shots from Maggie's dream. A guy is moving around and Suzanne shoots, but she gets grabbed. And then we get to look at this.
A human skull.
We then jump straight into Night at the Festival. The turnout seems good, and it actually all looks really decent. I'd love to go to something like this. Maggie's on the door and Mark appears with another date. Ooh. The first film's beginning, and it's called The Mosquito 3D, which is like a giant monster movie takeoff. Maggie goes to see Toby, one of the film club guys, and she thinks she saw Gates at the box office. She wants to find him and make a movie about him, so Toby decides to go looking for him with her, but gets locked outside. Mark has left the film and meets with Maggie while some other big guy takes his place. The gimmick for this film is a giant mosquito model on a string coming out, and it seems to be working a treat, but a mysterious man has a remote control and turns the mosquito around to stab Mr. Davis, the teacher. The killer then takes the body of Mr. Davis and makes a mould of his face. Meanwhile, Maggie tells Mark about Gates, and she thinks that she's Gates' daughter, Sarah. The next film is starting. This one's called The Electrified Man, taking off the experiment gone wrong sci-fi horror genre. Maggie goes back to the ticket stand and Mark goes back to the movie, but the big dude ain't moving and punches Mark in the face. A guy called Bud is getting the gimmick ready for this film, which is electrifying some of the audience's chairs, and oh, no way, it's Bruce Glover. I'm a huge Crispin Glover fan, and I've only ever seen his dad act in It's Fine, Everything Is Fine, so I was really looking forward to this film mainly to see him in it, and he does a decent job. Very fun to watch. Anyway, Gates communicates with Maggie through a tape recorder, but she accidentally breaks it when she opens a door on Mark.
Mark! Sorry! What are you doing here?
Meanwhile, Tina, another of the film club students, goes round the back to see the killer in a Mr. Davis mask hoisting up the mosquito, and he beckons her over. Bud is preparing the electricity, and as Bruce Glover gets electrocuted, he zaps people, and he seems to really enjoy it. Tina wants to have sex with Mr. Davis, and they kiss, but he bites off her tongue and then rips off his mask. No way, there's the menu image. I cannot believe that was Bruce Glover all along, that's incredible. So Maggie and Mark are snooping around, and they get locked out while the killer is hooking Bud up to the electrical board. We get some funny heckling.
Kiss me, Dick!
Kiss your what?
And Maggie and Mark are back. They go up to see Bud, but it's too late and he gets electrocuted. Love the effect. This blows the power though, and the killer confronts Maggie calling her Sarah. She freaks out and runs. She bumps into Toby and says that she remembers now that Gates is her father and her mum was killed, but her aunt, who is now her mum, saved her, shot Gates and burnt down the theatre. Her and Toby go into the basement to switch on the lights, but they get attacked by the killer. The lights come back on, and here we see the killer trying on different faces and doing impressions. It's quite funny.
You might say,
I'm multi-identical.
And as you've heard, with the help of electronic voice harmonics,
I've become Tina, the class bimbo.
I can look like anybody I want to.
It's revealed that the killer is actually Toby, who was the son of one of the cult members, and the burning down of the theatre disfigured him. He plans to recreate the Possessor showing, along with the killings, hoping that it will undo all the damage to him and his family. Mark's date Joy has a spat with Mark, and the big guy gets involved again, but a girl punches him and they kick him out. Back to Toby, and he has Suzanne in a cast. He plans to sacrifice her as well. Meanwhile, the last film The Stench is playing, with the gimmick being bad smells pumped into the theatre. Toby kills one of the guys by gassing him in a bathroom, and he goes to kill the girl, but thinking that it was the previous guy, she admits to fancying Toby, so he leaves in a huff. Toby drugs Maggie and starts to play the Possessor. The audience boo until they all appear on stage. Toby plays it up for the audience, asking if they want him to kill the girl, and the audience all think it's an act and cheer. Mark appears and ziplines down. Toby freaks out, but the mosquito swings in and kills him. The police arrive, Mark and Maggie kiss, and the film ends. Okay then, so what did I think? I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was paced well, the comedy was okay, as was the gore and the acting, and to be honest, I didn't guess the twist in this one. There were two parts of this film I thought really sold it to me. The acting of Toby. It was so fun to watch, like a Jim Carrey character.
Lanyard Gates began Possessor at midnight, and we will follow in his footsteps. Wait, I forgot the other member of the original cast.
And also the B movies themselves. You can tell they were made by film fans and are really spot on to what they were spoofing. Now for the release, and you know what, it's good. Clear print, both visuals and audio, with barely any issues. They didn't put the logo in though, that didn't last long. But we do get the menu again with Bruce Glover on it. Again, no special features. I think it's safe to say that the days of special features are over. But then again, with the Dead of Night release, it's hard to say really. Now for the case. It's spelling error free, but I don't think it quite gets the movie. The killings weren't inspired by the B-movies, they were based on a cult's ritual, and he isn't looking for stars, he already has them, he's just killing other people for some reason. I guess that's a bit of a flaw. The runtime's spot on again, and again it's a 15, and fair enough, it wasn't overly gruesome or disturbing or anything. Overall then, I had a lot of fun with this. You can tell it was made by film fans, and for once the print was okay. If you're looking for a silly yet entertaining horror comedy, you could do much worse than this. I'd recommend both the film and the release. Alright, so today we're going to be talking about Alienator. Now I have not been looking forward to this one. The name makes it sound terrible. Let's have a look. Alienator is a sci-fi film directed by Fred Olen Ray in 1990. Olen Ray has directed over 100 films, mostly being TV movies, and all of them looking awful. So the film begins with an overstatement and some scrolling text that gives us a little backstory about the prison planet with a strict commander who likes to execute people. We're then on said prison planet, and what the hell is she wearing? It looks ridiculous. We then meet our main character Cole, who looks a little like Charlie Sheen playing Solid Snake. He's on the list to be executed and the commander really doesn't like him, and he beats him up a little. Cole then looks at a bug on a wall. A general called Lund comes to visit the planet to observe their customs, so the commander gets an execution set up for him. He also makes the guards get Cole out of his cell to watch. Tarr is about to perform the execution, but it doesn't work, and after a little rejigging, it works fine and the prisoner is executed. And it looks awful. Lund doesn't like it at all though. He says his planet's all about peace and rehabilitation. Cole breaks free of the guards and a laser fight ensues. And looks terrible. Also, this is a really cliché death. Cole sneaks up on a guard and shoves a bag in his face. No idea where he got that from. But it's got bugs in it and they eat his face. Cole escapes into a pod and the commander sends out the Hunter. And then fucking credits. 12 minutes into the film and the credits kick in. How stupid is that? After the credits we get some terrible models and Col is heading for Earth. On Earth, 4 teens are in a caravan going on holiday. We have Rick, Billy, Caroline, and you know what? I'm not sure if her name is ever mentioned.
I drive better on a couple brews.
They see this shitty flaming ball in the sky and decide to check it out, but on the way they run over Col.
What happened? Damn!
Rick hit someone.
Oh, great driving, Mario! Damn!
Why Mario? What? They pick him up and put him in the caravan where he screams and wheezes. We then jump over to these 2 hunter guys. How many characters are in this thing? These 2 are called Harley and Bert, and they're basically just comic relief, I guess. They're trying to poach a rabbit, but the ranger called Ward tells them to bugger off. After this silly bit of editing, the kids arrive at Ward's place. They explain what happened, and Ward takes everyone into his cabin. He then rings a drunk doctor who says he'll be over shortly. Col wakes up.
Look at those eyes. It looks like he's whacked out on PCP.
And warns everyone of something dangerous coming. Back on the prison planet and the commander's getting weird with Tarr, while Lund is looking at a game thing. A guard comes in, saying the hunter has landed, and Col is wearing a tracking collar. The doctor's car won't start, and some woman appears. This is the hunter, and it kills the doctor by setting him on fire. We get some flickers, of course, and the power goes out, as well as the cars and other electrical things. Later, Col says that the hunter is outside and a car starts freaking out. Benny and Ward go to take a look. Rick stands back and Col urges him to shoot it, so he does, but it doesn't really do much, and they run. In the woods, they plan to use Col as bait along with a bear trap. They set up the trap, but Bert stands in it in a very non-violent way. The hunter appears and kills Harley and Bert. Good. There's a little gun battle, and one of Ward's shots fucks up the hunter's weapon, and they run again. The hunter stood in a trap and pulls a huge thorn from his foot, and then pets a deer. The gang run over to a colonel's house, and he plans to kill it with an AK-47. He kits everyone up, and they wait. The colonel shoots off Col's collar, and they plan to use it as well as a landmine in a little trap. But Col seems to think a metal net would work better, as it would interrupt its signals or some shit like that. The hunter finds the collar, but the mine doesn't go off, so the colonel shoots it and it explodes. But yet again it doesn't do very much. Col tries bargaining with Rick, saying he wants to learn the ways of the planet and he can offer riches, but Rick wants none of it. The hunter is on the roof,
She's on the fucking roof!
And they run outside to find it. It appears behind Rick and strangles him. Caroline shoots it in the back of her head with a crossbow, and Billy throws a metal net over it and kills it, and it looks awful. Everyone relaxes, but Col's taken Rick somewhere to strike up a deal again. Rick still wants none of it, so Col zaps him in the head with something. Rick walks back alone. I wonder what could have happened. He gets all weird with that girl, and Ward pushes him off. So he shoots Ward and threatens everyone else. It turns out it was Col all along. What a surprise. The hunter appears and kills Col, and then gives Ward some jewels or something. Back on the prison planet, and it's revealed that Lund is Col's dad, and he's pissed. They have a knockoff lightsaber fight, and Lund dies, and the film abruptly ends. Right then, so what did I think? I thought it was awful. It was very dull, the effects were half good and half terrible, the acting was pretty bad, and nothing really happened. There was a lot of characters to keep track of, and it all felt very cheap and rushed. I don't really know what else to say about it other than what did you expect from a film called Alienator? Which I have no idea why it was called that. Was the hunter called the Alienator? Because they never said that in the film. And now for the release. It's alright really. Clear print and okay audio. It did get a little shitty at the end.
Alright, don't give me another beer.
I think you've had enough to drink for 6 in the morning, Rick.
I wanted to drink a toast to Carolyn.
What I had in mind a little late.
I said leave me alone, Rick. I mean it.
And there were a few flickers, but it was fine. No logo at the beginning, and the menu's gone as well. We're back to the menu being at the end of the film. What the fuck? And now for the case. What did they do here? The first sentence just starts, it feels like it has a few words missing. They spelled prepares wrong. 1000s. It might just be me, but I always read that as 1000s. This whole sentence here. Pull the lever and vaporize coal. She pulls. But nothing happens. Also, why the fuck is this important enough for the back of the case? Terrible. The runtime's right there, but yet again, no special features. Overall then, this film is terrible, boring and cheap, with very little going for it. If for some reason you are interested in watching it though, you could probably do a lot worse than this print. I would not recommend the film, but I would recommend this release. Alright, so this week we're taking a look at Just for the Hell of It, and I've really been looking forward to watching this one. Now, I have 2 copies because they sent me one by mistake when I sent off for Silent Night, Bloody Night, which turned out to be one of the harder DVDs to get a hold of. Let's have a look. Just for the Hell of It is an exploitation film directed by Herschel Gordon Lewis in 1968. For those who don't know, Herschel Gordon Lewis is one of the biggest names in exploitation, directing such films as 2000 Maniacs, Wizard of Gore, and She-Devils on Wheels. He's credited as creating the splatter horror subgenre and is referred to as the Godfather of Gore. A little forewarning for this, the film plays out mostly as a montage, so quite a bit of the synopsis may feel just like a list of events. So the film begins with a house party. Someone gets fishbowl water poured on their heads, and then everyone starts destroying stuff, for quite a while. We get the title with some great artwork and music, and then we jump over to a bar where a band is playing, with a Ringo Starr of their own apparently. We then meet our gang, Dexter, Denny, Lummox and Bitsy, who are laughing about the party last night. Dexter and Bitsy leave and Lummox gets weird with a girl.
Wow, look at that!
He attacks her and she attacks back. The gang leaves and the girl awkwardly talks to the camera.
He's terrible. Nobody even noticed my new Supergirl uplift.
The gang piss off a passerby and then go for a drive. They throw water at a woman, set fire to someone's newspaper, and flick off a police officer's hat. We then get a weird cut and they set fire to someone's garden, and then wet the homeowner. We're then in a diner. A couple walk in. They're called Doug and Jean. The gang doesn't seem to like them. Bitsy goes over acting all flirty and says that Dexter would like to talk to Doug, so he goes over. Dexter says that one of his gang members doesn't like him and he wants to fight him, so they fight. We get some very fake punches and it keeps cutting to this guy. Doug wins and he and Jean leave. The gang then trashes the diner and burns the owner's arms. We're then at a police station when the police have brought Dexter in for questioning. He acts like a dick and leaves.
Everybody's gotta be somewhere.
We then go back to the gang who pick on a blind man and beat him up, attack an injured man, put a baby in the bin and destroy its pram, rip up a woman's magazine, attack an office worker, attack a painter and graffiti on the walls, and finally attack a bike. We then cut over to a high school where 4 girls are standing outside. They get invited to a party by the gang with the promise that a celebrity they like will be there, so they go. They arrive and they look really concerned. Dexter informs them that Rocky Reeves, the celebrity, is late and offers them a drink, which Bitsy drugs. They drink up while being annoyed by really annoying people. After a weird fade to black, the girls get attacked. Dexter says Rocky isn't coming and the girls are crying and they kick them out. We then jump over to a field where some kids are playing baseball. The gang appear and attack them. Doug arrives and tries to fight off the gang, and he's losing when an old woman calls over a police officer. She tells the officer that Doug started it. That really annoyed me. Stupid old bitch. The policeman believes her and takes Doug away.
They were playing ball and he started a fight. Or was it them? No, it was he that started the fight.
After a little strobe lighting, we're in a house with Jean and Doug. They're pissed off for having to pay bail. The phone rings and Jean answers. She says it was a man saying that they were in trouble for squealing. We're then in a bar with the gang and Doug walks in. He asks about the phone call but Dexter plays dumb. The gang then go to the beach and drink beer, or throw it around. What a waste. They see a couple on the beach. They attack the guy, rape the girl, and throw the guy's body, presumably dead, into the water. We then cut to Doug and Jean in a pool. The gang appear, and they kind of threaten them.
Just looking, man.
Later, we're at Jean's house, and she's waiting for Doug. She calls the police to report the mysterious phone call she got earlier, but they're no help. Also, apparently Doug is 2 hours late. Over to the gang now, and they come up with a plan wherein Bitsy lures Doug over to hers, and the gang goes and attacks Jean. The plan seems to work. Doug goes over to Bitsy's as he thinks she's on his side, and the gang snoop around Jean's. Jean puts on this really silly night outfit, and turns out the line. The gang attacks and tries to rape her. Bitsy's getting flirty with Doug, but he realises what's going on and rushes over to Jean's, but it's too late. He finds her cut up and nearly dead on the floor. Or maybe dead, not sure. He chases them in a car, and the police follow. The gang in the car get pulled up by the police, and Dexter and Bitsy fly off their motorbike and die. We get the name of the film.
Why, son? Just for the hell of it.
And the film ends. So, what did I think? I thought it was good. I'm a fan of Lewis's though, and this film does not disappoint. It reminded me of an early John Waters film, or a sleazier Kenneth Anger film. It was a little slow in places, and the plot was quite thin, but I liked the montage style of filmmaking, and the acting and music were all great. It's very much a time capsule to the angst and fear of the 60s with the hippie and freak gangs, and the state of the law at the time. It was quite difficult to watch in parts, and cheap as hell in others, but it gives it all a charm. Now for the release. It was okay. The video quality was a little grainy, but for a film this sleazy, it really adds to it. Makes you feel like you're watching some bizarre rented VHS in the 80s. The audio was okay. It did have some issues with the music, like here. Not sure if that's intentional or an issue with the DVD. The logo and menu are back. Missed out on the last one, but back here. Just for the hell of it, I guess. And now onto the case. It's not too bad at all. Missing a comma here, but other than that, seems fine. I find it funny that it mentions its favourite bit there. Runtime's spot on. No special features, but we already knew that, didn't we? Some of the things worth mentioning. That this film's a 15, which really shocked me. I've seen a lot tamer 18s, and this film has a lot of uncomfortable scenes. It just seems odd. Also, this is where the spine numbers start getting weird. The last film was 20, and this is 22, and as far as I'm aware, still, there's no number 21. Overall then, this was great. If you like sleazy exploitation, or any other works by Herschel Gordon Lewis, you're gonna want to see this. And this print ain't half bad either. I'd recommend both the film and the release. Alright, so this week we're taking a look at Kill Baby Kill. Now, I don't really know too much about this one, so let's just have a look. Kill Baby Kill, also known as Curse of the Living Dead, is an Italian horror film directed by Mario Bava in 1966. The film is cited as an influence to such directors as Martin Scorsese and David Lynch, and it currently holds a 7.1 on IMDb. So the film begins with a maid running outside a large house moaning and seeming like she's being followed. She runs into a doorway and kills herself on some spikes. We then get the titles and the sound of a kid laughing. We jump over to some people carrying a coffin through the streets, and a horse and carriage pulls up with a doctor inside called Paul. The carriage driver says he'll go no further as the village is cursed. Paul goes into the village and looks for an inn. When he enters, everyone stares at him. He asks if there's an inspector waiting for him, and they all keep quiet until the Burgermeister, called Carl, tells Paul that he's upstairs waiting. We see the inspector questioning one of the townsfolk and not really getting very far. He's annoyed at how superstitious everyone in the town is.
We might as well live on the moon.
We find out here that the doctor has been called in to autopsy the maid who died at the beginning, to find out if she was killed or if she killed herself. Paul mentions he saw the townsfolk preparing for a funeral, and they rush over to the graveyard. The inspector just manages to stop the gravediggers from burying the body of the maid. Cut over to Paul in a Tim Burton film, and he's waiting for his witness for the autopsy. She arrives, and her name is Monica. We get some excellent graveyard shots, and the autopsy begins. He finds a small coin planted in the maid's heart, which apparently matches up with the town saying,
They say, only with money in the heart will one who suffers a violent death ever rest in peace.
Afterwards, we learn that Monica returned to the town to visit her dead parents' grave, which ties into the plot later. They say goodnight and separate. Paul gets ambushed and nearly stabbed in an alleyway, but the attackers are scared off by a mysterious woman. We get an audio issue and a flicker. And we're back at the inn. The innkeeper's daughter Nadine says that the inspector's gone to Villa Graps, and apparently people don't return from there. She acts all strangely, and a little girl appears at a window. Suddenly the mysterious woman appears again. She's called Ruth, and she's here to help Nadine, who is now apparently cursed. So they go around back and start performing a ritual. Paul hears all this and stops Ruth outside to ask her some questions. Ruth says everyone in town is cursed and he should never go to the Villa Graps. Ruth gets home and Carl is there. They're a couple, and he's brought another body. They say they need to bury the dead or they become ghosts. Paul is over at the villa, even though he's been told not to go. We get some lovely shots and he bumps into the Baroness Graps. She says the inspector isn't there and tells him to leave. She then sits down and freaks out. Paul sees a little ghost girl with a ball. Her name's Melissa. She vanishes and we zoom in on this terrifying painting of Melissa. Oh. Bit unflattering. Meanwhile, Monica is having a nightmare with this creepy fucking doll, and it appears on her bed. She runs terrified and bumps into Paul. The bell tower chimes, even though the rope isn't moving, and they head for the inn. The innkeeper says Melissa died under the bell when she was 7. Paul just kind of ignores this, and sends Monica to bed. He hears some strange noises coming from Nadine's room, so he goes to check, and she's got like barbed wire wrapped around her. Paul helps her out with traditional medicine, and goes to bed. Some supernatural stuff happens, like windows moving, and he sees a light in a graveyard, so he goes to check it out. He finds the inspector's corpse. Meanwhile, Nadine is getting haunted, and she kills herself on a metal spike. Paul and Monica go to Carl's and accuse him of the inspector's death. He tries to convince him it was Melissa, and wants him to leave. He also has proof that Monica isn't from around there, and her parents aren't dead. He goes up to get the proof, but is killed by Melissa and drops the documents into the fire. Oops. They go back to the inn, but the innkeeper is pissed that Nadine is dead and tells them to bugger off. They run and Monica finds a secret passageway that she feels is familiar. They walk through it to a family grave, and they find their way to the Villa Graps, and the Baroness tells them all about Melissa. It turns out that during a festival, Melissa was chasing her ball and she was trampled to death by horses, and no one helped her because they were all too drunk, and she bled to death. She shows them Melissa's room, which she left the way it was after she died, and that damn doll's back. Then things get trippy. Melissa appears and Paul chases someone through a looping room, and it turns out to be himself. He backs into a painting and appears outside. He then wakes up in Ruth's house. She says she's going to avenge Carl. Back at the villa, and Monica learns that she's Melissa's sister and the Baroness's daughter. Also, the Baroness is Melissa's medium and can't help channeling her. Melissa appears and Monica runs. Ruth shows up to kill the Baroness. Monica is freaking out and is about to jump off a ledge. Ruth kills the Baroness but gets stabbed as well. Paul saves Monica just in time and they're safe. We see that fucking painting again and the film ends. Okay then, so what did I think? I thought it was excellent. It was like a very trippy giallo film, but with a more gothic horror style. The acting and dubbing was good, the music was great, done by Carlo Rusticelli. The sets were really well made, and the cinematography was a highlight. Just look at some of these shots. And the camera work was great too. It was a very engaging and in some parts quite scary supernatural horror film that completely took me by surprise. And you can really see why it was such an influence on some really big names in film. I purposefully left out showing a lot of the scarier parts. I didn't want to ruin it, and it's really worth seeing for yourself. Now on to the release. It was good, both video and audio quality. There were a few flickers, but nothing major. We also have the logo and menu again. It's weird that they missed out a few and then brought it back. I had a few issues playing this DVD on my PS3 and PS2. Not sure what it was all about, but I managed to watch it in the end. And now for the case. It all seems okay. They capitalise nightmare for some reason, and the runtime's 3 minutes off, but that's about it. No special features as per usual. Again, it's a 15, and it's fair enough for this one. It focuses way more on supernatural than gore or sexual violence. Overall then, this film was a real treat, with an interesting story, genuinely scary moments, and excellent cinematography. Makes it well worth checking out. Now, there are a few releases of this in the UK, but I think they're all the same print, so if you see this one lying around, you might as well pick it up. I'd recommend both the film and the release. Alright, so this week, we're taking a look at Curse of the Demon Mountain. Now, I've been wanting to watch this one for quite a while, for a very specific reason, and we'll talk about that later. So let's have a look. Curse of the Demon Mountain, otherwise known as The Shadow of Chikara, Wishbone Cutter, The Ballad of Virgil Caine, and Thunder Mountain, is an American horror western film directed by Earl E. Smith in 1977. This is the only film Smith has directed, and we get a small appearance from Slim Pickens, a famous cowboy-turned-actor who's been in such films as Blazing Saddles and Dr. Strangelove. So the film opens up with a fast text crawl about the worth of gems. We get the titles and some flickering, and we're thrown into the final battle of the Civil War. We meet our main characters, Captain Cutter, who is leading the Southern Army, and Half Moon O'Brien, who is like Cutter's right-hand man. They get the order to attack, which doesn't go so well. A guy called Virgil, played by Slim Pickens, gets attacked, and after they lose the battle, he tells Cutter and Moon about some diamonds he found as a boy. He hid them in a cave.
Watch yourself up there on that mountain. It's spooky up there.
And he says if they can find them, they can have them, and then he dies. Cutter tries to go home, but his wife thought he was dead and she's found another guy. The two men fight, and we get a lot of audio issues. Cutter eventually leaves with Moon. They sit by a river and chat about getting the diamonds. Cutter knows a geologist who'll be able to help, so they go and meet him. They meet in a bar with the geologist, who's known as Teach, and they set off. While on their way, they pass a bunch of bodies. An arrow hits Teach in the arm, and they flee, but Cutter comes back to pick up a girl, who I thought was dead. Turns out she's just in shock. They rip out the arrow and chat about how they think the girl was raped. Cutter wakes her up by chucking her in a river and then forcing her to drink some booze. She comes around, and we find out her name is Drusilla. Teach thinks Cutter was too rough with her, and he chats with her for a bit, and they seem to hit it off. We have a weird quick fade to Moon, who says he can't see any tracks from the tribe, but he feels that they are being followed. They set up camp, and Teach and Cutter argue about what to do with Drusilla. Cutter wants to leave her because he doesn't want her to know what they're doing, but Teach wants her to tag along so she can keep safe, and they end up deciding to keep her with them. The next morning, Moon hears something. Another arrow flies in, but he still can't see the tribe. They move out and they ride through the day. They set up camp in a cave again at night when a thunderstorm hits. Cutter goes to see Moon, who is standing guard, but the horses have gone, so Moon goes looking for them alone. Moon brings the horses back by the morning, but they have weird marks on them. They set off again, and they see a guy in the woods, so they shoot at him. We get a very weird cut, and apparently there are two of them, and they're bushwhackers, so they invite them back to the cabin for a rest. The group doesn't trust them though, and after eating they make their excuses and leave.
This my path takes you right down the river.
A third man appears, and he says that they should follow and kill the group. It's suddenly snowy now, and the bushwhackers have tracked the group, but Cutter knows that they're there. Teach has a plan to plant some dynamite to blow up the rocks. He does it, and the avalanche of boulders kill them. They set up camp and drink coffee. Drusilla goes for a piss, and they hear a man screaming. She runs back, and Moon goes to check it out, and he finds a dead guy. They finally reach the mountain, and Moon recognises it. There's a legend attached to it of an eagle called Chikara that was killed by man, and now seeks revenge on any man that goes to the mountain. Drusilla wants to know what's going on, and Teach tells her everything. They go and look around a cave and find a big hole.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
That's one hell of a hole.
They search some more, but no luck. Moon doesn't like it, though he thinks he shouldn't be there. They rest, and Drusilla has a go at Cutter for being a dick to her. After an awful VHS thing, whatever the hell you'd call that, Drusilla and Moon go to get the horses, but something strange happens and the horses, along with Drusilla and Moon, fall off the cliff. And yeah, they actually threw horses off a cliff for this shot. Drusilla shouts up through the rubble though, she's still alive. Cutter shimmies down the cliff and rescues her, but Moon is dead. Cutter thinks he knows where the stones are, and they go back to the cave and to the big hole. Teach is the one shimmying down this time, and they find them. Teach says that they're actually diamonds. They're all happy, but Cutter's worried about the journey back. Teach is on the lookout, and Cutter is asleep. Drusilla comes outside to Teach, and they kiss. She leads him over to the bushes, but he gets an arrow to the throat. She runs back to the cave and wakes up Cutter. He hugs her, they kiss, and start getting a little frisky. But Cutter notices a strange tattoo on her arm. She stabs Cutter and runs around outside with an eagle. Guess she's the demon of the Demon Mountain? She's the curse of the... She's the Demon Mountain? I don't know. People are coming, so she lays down around the dead bodies, rips her clothes, and sets herself up like she did the last time. And the film ends. Okay, so, what did I think? I didn't really like it. It wasn't my sort of film, I don't think. There's a lot of nothing. A lot of walking through the woods and just very dull scenes that didn't really go anywhere. The characters were very bland and hard to get behind. The idea was okay, I just think it was executed poorly. The music was very nondescript, as was everything else really. A lot of my issues do have something to do with the release though, which I'll cover now. So yeah, the release. I mean, just look at it. This is the worst one in a while. It's so blurry and dull, it's unreal. And the audio, well, I thought there was a major audio issue with sound cutting out, like here.
Leave him alone, you...
But on second thought, I think that they're muting swearing, which is ridiculous. Also, just look at some of these edits.
Point. You got a cushy job doing the fighting.
And this one as well.
I bet I scared y'all, didn't I?
There's got to be scenes cut out. I looked on the BBFC website, and it says only 6 seconds were cut for the horses being killed, but IMDb says there's a version that's 13 minutes longer, so I'm wondering what happened. On top of all this, we get flickers, odd fades, and it's just a mess. We get the logo and menu again though, so that's something. Now for the case. Right, so these commas seem a little out of place, fair enough, but it tries to be clever with a covey of hawks. Now the group name for hawks is either a cast or a kettle, not a covey. But also, there isn't a cast of hawks in this film, there's like one eagle, so why they even bothered, I've no idea. Apart from that, this bit looks a bit weird, the ending is not what it makes out it is, but the runtime's spot on. Now something I really need to talk about, and the reason I was interested in watching this one, is this rating, PG. This is what makes me think the swearing's cut out, and I'm guessing that this film has been cut to pieces for this, even though it still talks about rape and has horses dying. Also, just look at it with the rest of the collection. It looks stupid. Really, really bizarre choice. Overall then, I can't say I liked anything about this one. Maybe it's better uncut, I don't know. There are other versions released in the UK, but they go for stupid prices online. Now obviously the worst thing about this film was the print, and it's so bad that it's interestingly bad, and people who enjoy the terrible might get some enjoyment out of this. But saying that, I couldn't recommend the film or the release. Alright, so this week we're taking a look at the last film released on the Dead of Night collection, The Summer of the Massacre. Now, will they end on a high note, or will they just fade out with another piece of shit? Let's have a look. The Summer of the Massacre is a direct-to-video British horror film directed by Brian Hammond in 2006. Hammond owns the brand Gorezone and has only directed this film, but it's rumoured that there's a remake coming. This film has nothing to do with the 2012 anthology horror film of the same name. So, the film begins with credits and some text. It mentions this being a true story, with really weird phrasing, and also says that the footage in the titles is real police footage. Right. If you say so. If it is, it's very unimpressive. We get a very bland title card, and we're in the woods with a couple, and they're arguing as the girl doesn't want to go camping.
Well, yeah, actually. Why you?
Well, when I asked you to book us a dirty weekend in a hotel, whining caller and MTV playing in the background, not this pile of crap.
Then our villain attacks. He's called Hammerhead, or generic slasher villain in a mask. He kills the guy and then chases the girl for ages. She screams a lot. And eventually dies. Cut to some time later, and a guy called Kurt is getting his van ready. Two girls show up called Katie and Judy. They take the piss out of his van and talk about going on a trip. They also mention that they watched Slumber Party Massacre. Wish I was watching that. Another of their friends called Josh appears, and he's hungover.
Alright. Yeah, my head is killing me. Oh, you know, last night.
Kurt goes to get a map. They argue a bit, and when Kurt gets back, they set off. After a while, they pull up so Josh can be sick, and then they drive on. They drive and argue. God, they argue so much. Until they pull up to an abandoned petrol station. Kurt wanders around it for far too long. You're not getting any petrol, man. Then this guy appears. I think he's supposed to be drunk, and he mentions about a psychopath in the woods. Not that you can really hear him.
Up! Who the hell on the main road?
Katie appears, then disappears, and Kurt goes back to the van. They pull up again. I think they're low on petrol this time. Kurt and Judy decide to go looking for petrol while Katie and Josh look after the van. They sit around for ages, saying that they're bored. Eventually, Josh walks very far into the woods to piss, and he's killed by Hammerhead. He wraps Josh in cling film and drags him off. Katie goes looking for him and finds him cling filmed to a tree and acts really annoyingly.
Josh! Oh my god, Josh! Josh!
Hammerhead appears, he grabs Katie and nails her to a tree. She escapes and runs, so Hammerhead chases while carrying Josh. She crawls around and Hammerhead doesn't hit her for like ages. Eventually he ties her up with strawberry laces and takes her back to his house. He goes back, ties up Josh with more strawberry laces, and carries him off. Cut to Hammerhead getting in Kurt's van. Kurt and Judy appear and get scared and then chased by Hammerhead. They chase and fight. Hammerhead gets a stick in his leg, and then Kurt, being an idiot, thinks it's a great idea to split up. Judy's running and showing her acting faces while holding a big silly stick. Hammerhead comes, they chase and fight again, and he ends up killing her. Kurt sneaks up on Hammerhead and hits him. Even more chasing and fighting, and they run into a cornfield and Kurt shoves a stick in Hammerhead's eye. More running, and then they cuddle in the woods, and finally Kurt is killed and we jump over to Hammerhead sewing up his leg. Over at Hammerhead's house, and Katie breaks free and runs through the house away from him, and also now she's heavily pregnant. She finds a room full of body parts and fights with Hammerhead. She then runs outside, still very pregnant, and Hammerhead obviously chases. She crawls around and isn't pregnant anymore. She nicks his hammer and attacks him with it, killing him. She walks off laughing and more text appears saying that Katie's character was pregnant, which I think in the beginning it was mentioned.
Got a little one, you can't be smoking in the car. What the hell are you going on? Are you trying to get him into fucking labour or what?
But that doesn't explain how she managed to be heavily pregnant out of nowhere and then not again. Anyway, more fast title cards and the film ends. But wait. Oh shit, there's an after credits sequence. Shit. So, in this bit, a camp counsellor is inquiring about David and Ricky not showing up, and they're the couple from the beginning of the film. He mentions Friday the 13th, which I also wish I was watching instead of this, and then he walks into the woods. And who'd have thought it? Hammerhead's there. He kills the counsellor and takes out his eye. We get a to be continued card, which I think is a lie, and then the film really ends. Right then, so what did I think? Well, what do you think? It was awful. Now, it was very low budget, which is fair enough. That wasn't the reason it was bad. It was bad for being so boring. Most of the time we're seeing boring chase scenes in the woods, gore is minimal, as is any sort of plot development, the acting isn't great at all, and the girls just run through the woods annoyingly screaming as loud as they can, and it's just irritating. The music was like half bad, half good. The editing was okay-ish, a lot of fades to black. And you know what this film loves? Can you tell yet? It loves to tell us the time, day and location, as if it's important. So many time cards, it's just stupid. Also, the continuity isn't great. I still can't believe that the actor's heavily pregnant for a few scenes near the end. It's ridiculous. And now for the release. It's okay. Any issues with audio or video quality I think comes from the original print, with it being so low budget. We get the logo and menu again. Great to see that they're still here for the last one. And look at this. Bonus features. No way, I can't believe we get some stuff for the last film. And the stuff on offer's okay. We get 2 trailers and some deleted scenes. Now the main issue is that it's for this film and not a better one like Kill Baby Kill or Popcorn, but at least it's not an image gallery. The trailers are bog standard and serviceable. The first one likes to count for some reason and the other features lots of quotes but doesn't cite where they're from, so they could be plucked from anywhere. We also get 3 deleted scenes with a little interview from an actor. The scenes are nothing worth watching really, it doesn't really add to anything. And now for the case. And it's okay really. It capitalises college and summer for some reason, but it's fine. The runtime is off by 14 minutes though. The film actually only comes in at 76 minutes long, which is a good thing really. It still feels too long though. But 14 minutes is a long time to be off by. Not seen something that bad in a while. Also, this is where the spine numbers jump from 25 to 36. Lastly, this film's a 15, which is fair enough. It is just running through the woods after all. Overall then, this was a bit of an uninteresting mess, with baseline story, bad acting and weird editing. It's just not a good film. If for some reason though you are compelled to see it, the print's okay and you get a few special features. I would not recommend the film, but I'd recommend the release. And that's it. That's all the films talked about. So join me next week. I'll do a little bit of an outro video, just some final thoughts and just a bit more on the release. Alright, so, the Dead of Night collection. After watching all the films, I can honestly say that I'm genuinely surprised by how many gems I managed to find. I thought going into this I'd be watching a lot of crap with a few classics in between, and I guess for the most part I kinda was, but there were a lot of films that actually took me aback by being way better than they should have been. I do wonder though, having been watching so many B-movies and bottom of the barrel films, if I ended up being too lenient on some films that managed to slightly entertain me. But I mean, from this kind of film, there's a certain type of person who can really enjoy something awful or silly just as much as a well-made and thought-out classic, and I'd say I fit into this category. So overall, through these films, I recommended 12 of them, slightly recommended 4, and didn't recommend 8. You know what? That's way more recommendations than I thought I'd give, and I managed to find some enjoyment in 16 of the 24 films. Bearing in mind though that on some of these DVDs the film turned out to be good but the print was just dreadful, and there were more instances of that than I would have liked, and it severely hinders the collection. But it also adds some level of intrigue and just makes some of these already bizarre releases even stranger. You'll never know what's coming next. One instant you're watching a perfect copy of a film you never even knew existed, and the next you'll be watching some awful VHS transfer of a film you thought was 10 minutes longer than it actually is. As for the releases, there were 12 films with special features, 11 of which sadly included, or was exclusively, an image gallery. We had 6 instances of filmography spelt incorrectly, and we also had 2 instances of the original logo and 6 of the second logo, with 8 films also featuring the Dead of Night menu. The worst runtime was both Chopping Mall and The Summer of the Massacre, which were both off by 14 minutes. And finally, we had 7 Peters. My top 5 films were, in no particular order, Zombie Holocaust, Zombie Flesh Eaters, Kill Baby Kill, Troll 2, and Emanuelle and the Last Cannibals. My worst 5, again in no particular order, were Massacre at Central High, Alienator, Mausoleum, The Summer of the Massacre, and Night of the Beast, with Massacre at Central High still being one of the worst films I have ever seen. Since starting these reviews, there's still no new information on the company. If though I do find anything out of note in the future, or it turns out I missed a film, I'll make another video. I think the most important point to discuss is whether or not it's worth getting this collection. I think it completely depends on who you are. If you're the sort of person who enjoys the good and the bad and everything in between, and has a deep interest in horror films of all kinds, I think you'd benefit from getting these. There's enough variety and strangeness to keep you interested. If, though, you've watched these and thought that all the films look shit or subpar, I'd probably say avoid getting them all, but there are definitely a few worth owning. And I think that's everything. It was fun collecting the films and even more fun making these videos, and they actually gave me an excuse to watch them. It was great looking closely at everything this bizarre and mysterious release has to offer. And that's it. Thanks for watching.